So John and Dave, are we expecting more people from the agency?
Yeah, just one.
Okay.
John, Matthew.
Okay.
But you have a quorum. But John did say he would be here.
Well, I'll give him 15 seconds.
Hey, Kayla, before you get started, I was going to ask folks to mute themselves unless they're talking, just we have a lot of people on here, so I minimize the chance of background noise.
Okay. Well, in the interest of undoubtedly a busy evening, I think we should probably start. So I'd like to open up the Wetlands Agency meeting of May 3rd, 2021 at 7:02 p.m. And so we have on the agenda our public hearing for application 21-03-856 Boston Post Road. And this is a continuation of the public hearing. But, and I know I always have to remember this, do we open it up first and then hear the updates from the applicant? Or should we have the applicant up? Because part of this was well, we did continue so that they could add on and finalize their application. This is for Dave or John.
Yeah, so I think probably the process should be to allow the applicant to do a presentation. I think we didn't get really into it last meeting. And then I guess Attorney Ainsworth can advise if he'd like to go next as the intervener or if he'd like to defer to the public. So I think after the applicant's presentation, we can decide the format from there.
Okay, I think that sounds great. So the applicant can go. I would ask, because I know this has been a contentious application out in the public realm. Our agency is really dealing with inland wetlands. So to the extent possible, that's what we want to hear about tonight, because that's what we can vote on. All right, so whoever's speaking for the applicant can go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Chris McKeon. I think you all know I represent the applicant here. With regard to the statement you just made about the public hearing, as I understand it, the public hearing has already been opened and we are just resuming the public hearing tonight. Is that not everybody's understanding? Dave, is that your understanding?
Yes, that's my understanding.
I just want to make sure that that's clear. So we have our team of professionals here tonight. The site engineer is Mike Ott, landscape architect John Cunningham, our geologist and explosives expert, whom you've heard from before, Rick Hosley, is here. And we also have our soil scientist, whom you have not heard from, but who has submitted a report, David Lord, here to present with us tonight. And just by way of how we got to where we are right now, we filed our application back in January. It was received on February 8th. And a public hearing was scheduled by your agency on the February 8th meeting on the basis of not that there would be a significant impact, but on the basis of public interest in the project. And the distinction is important.
actually, so I'm going to just, I read that in your response,
Yeah.
and I would just like to clarify that we never voted or discussed fully that application. I mean, when we discuss significant activities and having a public hearing, those are not necessarily interchangeable. We have many applications that we look at that have significant activity that aren't necessarily public hearing, because part of the public hearing process is the interests of the public. So I think to try to say that we had already decided that there wasn't a significant activity is misleading.
That's not what I'm saying, and you're right, that would be misleading. What I'm saying is that the public hearing was scheduled because of public interest in the project, not because of a specific finding by the agency that the activities or the project could result in a significant impact on a wetland. And the distinction is important because only if the public hearing is scheduled on a specific finding of significant impact or potential for it, is there the need for the agency to find the lack of a reasonable and prudent alternative under section 10.3 of the regulations. So I'm not saying you found no significant impact. That's what we're here for. That's the application is, and we hope you'll find that our activities are not going to have any impact, and certainly not a significant one, but the reason for the public hearing is important under the regulations. So I'm not trying to mislead. I'm just saying that we're here at a public hearing because of a determination that there was a lot of public interest in this project. And that was the rationale for scheduling it for a public hearing. So I hope that's not misleading, and I never meant to suggest that you already found there's no significant activity.
Okay. Well, that's fine.
We did open the public hearing on March 1st, and we gave presentations at that hearing. If you recall, there was an additional area of wetlands to the southeast of our site that was brought to our attention sometime between the filing of the application and when we began the public hearing. We, in April, came back and asked for additional time. So we're here tonight to present you with an update of what's occurred and what we're going to present to you tonight by way of update. First of all, the offsite area, the additional offsite wetland area to the southeast of our site, which was set forth in a report by the interveners soil scientist George Logan, has been considered and factored into our most recent filings. Additionally, by way of overall project advancements, the architectural drawings were slightly modified to make smaller garages in the back of the rear building and to decrease the size of 4 other garages, and also decrease slightly the size of the new area that will be added to the estate home. We're knocking down a section and putting back a new area, which is a smaller footprint than what's there now. But most importantly, we, during this interim period, obtained detailed survey data of the topography of the site, which enabled Mike Ott to prepare a revised plan showing the stormwater management system, and I'll let him go through that. We also, Mike Ott also prepared and submitted a stormwater management report in addition to his plans. We've had David Lord, our soil scientist, visit the site and issue a report. He will also be testifying tonight. With the additional and detailed topographic information that we were able to obtain, Mr. Hosley returned to the site and was able to specifically narrow in on the scope of the rock that will need to be removed as part of our development. That particular issue was not really known, the scope and the extent of that when we last were before the agency. All of these folks will present tonight. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to the site engineer, Mike Ott, so he can describe to you how we're handling the site in terms of stormwater and other areas that are relevant to the two off-site wetland areas that are the subject or concern here. So Mike, can you take it?
Yes, thank you. Just for the record, I'm Mike Ott. I'm a licensed professional engineer and land surveyor with Summerhill Civil Engineers and Land Surveyors here in Madison on Wall Street. May I share my screen, Dave and John?
Yep, go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. Bear with me 1 second, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. So I think I know we probably need to move this along as quick as we can, but I think it's been so long, and I don't know if we, how much of a project overview we did. So I thought I would do just as quickly as I can, a quick overview so everyone understands the scope of the project. So this may not be the best drawing. Hopefully you can all see this pretty well. So Boston Post Road and Birnbaum Lane on the left side of the sheet, north is pointing to the left. There is, as you all walked the site. So you saw the estate house roughly in the middle of the site up on the ledge outcrop. And you saw in this appendage kind of on the property, the land parcel, you saw this garage and an apartment building. So those are the two structures on the site. There's a bituminous concrete paved driveway. This loop driveway in the back, which is used for parking, and the bituminous concrete paved driveway comes all the way down to the garage apartment building, and it has its own loop also to turn around. So those are the major site improvements on the site, the two structures and the bituminous concrete pavement. There is a private water main, which is important, I think, on the site that I'm tracing with my cursor now. Hopefully you can see me tracing this. So it's a private main that goes through the site. From that main, water service is provided to the estate building. From that main, actually right here, water service is provided to the garage and apartment building. Please stop me if you have any questions while I'm doing this. From this private main, several other adjoining and/or properties in the vicinity are served also. One of the services is shown here. It leaves the property boundary here, the westerly boundary, and serves, I think the street address is 27 Bushnell Lane. The main continues off the property here and serves, I believe, at least two other properties, the immediate adjoiner, the Downs, and I believe one more property to the west. to my knowledge. The main was installed in the early 1900s. There are easement agreements regarding the main and the services and who's responsible for maintenance and repairs and that kind of thing. But it is, to our understanding, a private main. It is not owned or maintained by the Connecticut Water Company. Other utility services, power, communication, cable TV, are overhead from the utility pole line within the Route 1 Boston Post Road highway right-of-way. So there is a, sticking with existing conditions, there is a mapped inland wetland, as you, if you all remember, to off the site. There are no inland wetlands or watercourses located on the land parcel, the subject land parcel. There is a mapped wetland off-site at the southwest corner, and this blue arc, if you can see it, is the 100, represents the arc from the closest point of this wetland, the 100-foot upland review area arc. So you can see that this corner of the property is within the outer limits of the 100-foot upland review area. If you recall, we all stood up here on top of this exposed rock, and when we did the site walk, and we looked down at this off-site wetland, some 70-ish feet or so off-site. There is, so that wetland was mapped actually by the owner. A survey prepared for the owner when the owner owned this parcel to the immediate south back in, I believe, 2008, between 2007 and 2009, about that time period. There is also an additional, as you all know, an off-site wetland on the property at the southeast corner. In this general area, to our knowledge, that wetland is not mapped, but it has been delineated in the field, and I think you all saw the flagging by the intervener's soil and wetland scientist, George Logan. So the proposal is to, and again, I'll do this as quick as I can, to widen the existing driveway, which varies in width. It's 9 to 10 to 11 feet in width today. The proposal is to widen it to 18 feet in width, with a 2-foot reinforced shoulder on the east side, which would be this side, the internal side to the parcel. And the reason for that is to accommodate emergency service responders, specifically fire apparatus, in their operations. This is not the cleanest drawing to look at, but the proposal is to renovate the existing estate house, take off a good portion. The project architect can explain how much, but remove a portion on the east end of the estate house. Do not change its footprint I believe, other than this removal, to renovate this building and create 2 residential dwelling units inside it. To construct a new building out front, which will have 1 residential dwelling unit in it, and to construct 2 new identical buildings in the rear to the south, which would both have 2 residential dwelling units in it also. And also to remove the garage apartment building. So today there are 2 building structures on the site. When the project would be complete, there would be 4 buildings on the site. So there'd be a total of 7 dwelling units in 4 buildings. All of the overhead utility lines will be removed. Communication, power, and telephone would be underground. It will come up the driveway and serve all of the buildings. a brand new water main that will now be a public water main owned by the Connecticut Water Company, will be constructed all the way up the driveway within an easement in favor of the water company. The services that new services will go to all the buildings on the site. The services that currently serve the private main portion, and the services that serve the offsite properties will be maintained. They will come off the brand new Connecticut Water Company owned main, but they will be maintained where they leave this subject parcel's property boundary. Septic systems are all, if you recall, all the leaching fields for all of the buildings are down in the front. I'm calling the front the Boston Post roadside. The reason is there's two reasons. There's very different soil conditions. Either the estate building sits on top of a surface water divide, drainage divide. If we refer to this northern area out front as the northern catchment area, and the area to the south, the southern catchment area, in terms of surface water, the northern catchment area, the soils are mapped as sands and gravels, and our subsurface exploration program, our test pits, confirm that they are in fact sands and gravels. There is a broad, relatively flat lawn area out here. There, other than the ledge outcrop that the estate house sits on, there is no visible signs of exposed surface rock or rock outcrops. All the test pits that we did, I think we did 8 in this northern area. We went down 9 to 10 feet, all sand and gravel, no indications of bedrock, and no indications of a shallow groundwater table. In the rear, in the southern catchment area, the published soil mapping is different. There is exposed surface rock and rock outcrops. The soils are relatively sandy, glacial till. They're classified as well-drained soils. And in some of the test pits that we did, we went down 8 to 9 feet and there was no bedrock. In some of them, we encountered bedrock at 5 to 7 feet. So although there is exposed surface rock as well as rock outcrops in the rear, there are areas in the topography. The topography is undulating, and there are areas in the topography where there is no signs of surface rock or rock outcrops. And when we excavated test pits, we were able to go down relatively deep, either without encountering rock or rock at, like I said, 5 to 7 feet or so. Groundwater table in all of our test pits in this area was not encountered signs of high groundwater, a seasonally high groundwater in this area. So I said that the leaching fields would be up front. All of the septic tank chambers, except for, let me restart.
Yeah.
The septic tank and the pump chamber for this new building out front will be right. I'm sorry, the septic tank will be right behind the building. Typical placement for a typical single-family residential structure. The septic tanks for the 2 units in the estate house will also be down in the lawn area immediately adjacent to the septic tank for the new building. These 2 buildings, these 2 carriage house buildings in the rear, each dwelling unit requires a septic tank and a pump chamber. From those pump chambers, the force main, the wastewater effluent, will be pumped up to a high point on the east end of the building, and then it will come down by gravity to the leaching fields. So the only components in this southern catchment area of the wastewater systems are the building sewers, the pipe from the building to the tank, the septic tank, the pump chamber, and the force mains, the wastewater effluent force mains that pump the water back up to the high point and then down by gravity. So that is, I think, a really quick overview of the existing conditions in the proposed the proposal, with the exception of, and again, this isn't the best drawing to look at, but there is, if you recall, we've created a parking court in a turnaround area here. There is one, as you saw, there is one here today. We've shifted it and expanded it so that it is large enough to accommodate the turning radii of the fire department's largest fire apparatus. There is parking for all of the units back here. In addition, our stormwater management system, our subsurface stormwater management system, will be located below the ground here. And I'll explain a little more about that in a second. Any questions so far?
I got one question, Dave Newton. The unidentified wetlands, how far is that approximately from the edge of the property? Approximately, I understand it's not from that, but is it 5 feet or 100 feet or?
So we stood, David Lord and I, our wetland and soil scientist, stood at this property boundary here,
Yeah.
and we guessed, Dave, that it was 60 to 70 feet
Okay.
from the property boundary.
I walked down there, so I'm a little bit familiar with it, yes.
Okay.
Okay,
I actually, now that I think about it, I think we all, the commission, including the Conservation Commission, I think we all walked over to it at one point
Yep.
during the
Yes.
site walk.
a good number of us, yes.
Okay. So that's my estimate.
Thank you.
Okay, but I have a question. So I have a follow-up question for that. I know and I know someone else, kind of delineated that, but so we don't really know where the upland review is on the applicant's property.
Correct.
I mean,
because- Right.
well, I was just gonna say, we're estimating. I mean, it's, I wish I had thought about it, because I mean, you can get laser light measurement things, and we could have measured to the flag with, from the property boundary to the wetland flag. I mean, that's possible without going on someone else's property. So we know that there is upland review on this property, but we don't know where. Is that where we're left with?
Yes, absolutely. We are, of course, if it's as close as 60 feet, it would extend onto the property some 40 feet. We can't tell, the exact extents of whether it would be an arc or what area it would cover, but certainly, in fact, let me shift to a different sheet. And hopefully you can the commission see that I've changed to a different sheet, or do I have to stop sharing and reshare? Can the commission see the outline of the existing garage and
Yes.
oh, good. Okay. So we know that you're absolutely correct. Because we don't know where the limits of the wetland are exactly, we don't know where the limits of the 100-foot upland review area are. But it's very clear that at a minimum, a portion of this building is within the 100-foot upland review area. In addition, a portion of this pavement that's out in front of the building is within the 100-foot upland review area. And that's the existing plan. If I switch to the proposed plan, We know that the landscape architect has proposed, when this building comes down, the landscape architect has proposed a community garden and seating area in here. And again, certainly a good portion of that construction of that garden and seating area, or let me back up, the demolition of the building and its removal, and then the construction of the seating, the garden and seating area will be within the 100-foot upland review area. The removal of this pavement out in front of the garage will be within the upland review area, and so will the grading here that will take place to create lawn, as well as, you know, the removal of this overhead service, the removal of this water service. That's a pretty good, reasonable estimate of the work that would take place within the 100-foot upland review area. Let me just say that really quickly again. Demolition and removal of the building, removal of pavement, removal of this portion of the water service, the overhead utility line, construction of the garden and the seating area, and creation of a lawn area, grading and creation of a lawn area. To the best of my ability, that would be a good description of the work that would be within the 100-foot upland review area under this proposal.
So in other words, it'd be better off then than we are now.
Well, that's actually part of our presentation. Yeah, I mean, we can jump, while we're talking about this, we can jump to that right now. Today, we have the building here. And the ridge line of the building, there's several roofs as I recall, but the ridge line of the building runs like this, kind of east-west, I guess it would be. So at least this half of the roof water is draining, you know, in this direction, and presumably makes its way, you know, it's a fair bet that it makes its way to the wetland. In addition, and let me go back and switch. It's easier to see. I hopefully this pavement drains roughly as I'm tracing in this direction, and surface water runoff from it also heads in the direction of that wetland on the adjoining property. So in the proposed condition, and I talked about this in the stormwater management report, we're removing this building, so we're removing this impervious surface, of course, and constructing a community garden and seating area. And I'm quite sure that the landscape architect has said that the entire area, this entire surface area, will be a permeable surface. In addition, we're removing this pavement that's out in front of that building and turning it into lawn. So we're removing that impervious surface also. And what we're doing when we do that, we are taking the closest impervious surface to the wetland, which we're estimating to be 60 to 70 feet. And that would be the building. And we're removing it and this pavement, and we're pulling that impervious surface back so that under the new proposal, the closest impervious surface would be this portion of this building here. And that is roughly, approximately again, 130, 140 feet from the wetland. So in real simple terms, under the proposal, we are pulling back, removing and pulling back the impervious surface land cover from 60 or 70 feet to the wetland back to 130, 140 feet. Again, those distances are approximate. It's the best, you know, the best we could do. That actually is an important point, an important part of our plan. So when this is done, all this pavement out here, which is some 2,600 plus feet, gets removed. And this building, which is 1,740, I think, square feet, of approximately of roof area gets removed also. So 2,600 plus 1,740, that's the impervious surface that will be removed. More importantly, it's the closest impervious surface, ground, land cover to the wetland, and it gets pulled back again. So, so that the closest impervious surface is 130, 140 feet away from the wetland. Any other questions on that in particular?
Nope.
So I think I'd like to just talk a little bit about the rock removal and then stormwater management in general. So there is, as we talked about, I think in our first meeting and out in the field, there will be rock removal required to construct this project. There will be likely what we call rock and trench. A trench has to be excavated for the new water main, the new underground utility services, and the new water services. So where the contractor encounters rock below the surface of the ground, that rock has to be removed. So we call that rock and trench. It's got, it's a trench, a confined trench, just like when you're excavating in earth. In addition, to construct this building out front, Unit 1, a small portion of the exposed rock will have to be removed. And Rick Hosley will talk about this in more detail. So there's the rock and trench for water and other utilities, a small portion of rock that has to be removed for this building. There's likely, we don't know for sure, but when we redo this driveway, the profile of it, and we cut it down a bit, there's likely to be some rock removal at the high point. And then in the rear, in the southern portion, we are taking this area where these garages are up against the existing terrace down about 2.5 or so feet. It's possible that there might be rock removal there, although we did a test pit right in the middle of this island, and we went down 6-7 feet without hitting rock. When we, and again, Rick Hosley will go into this in more detail. If you recall, we walked up, some of us walked up this set of stairs and stood on top of this rock. This rock, when you first drive up this driveway and you see this really nice rock outcrop, this rock outcrop remains untouched. These stairs leading up to the top of it and this entire rock outcrop here remains untouched. To construct this building, carriage house number 2, we have to remove rock. And if you remember, I had explained in the field that we are quite literally going to slice down vertically 10 feet or so behind the building to leave just enough room to work. And that's the rock we have to remove. So once we did the detailed topographic survey, it turns out that we only have to remove several hundred square feet, some 300 or so square feet of rock in area. And we have to take that down approximately 6 feet in elevation. So I don't know if you're going to remember me saying this, but when we stood up here, I had conservatively overestimated. I had conservatively estimated, which turned out to be an overestimation, very conservative, the amount of ground surface area that we would disturb within this blue arc, within the 100-foot upland review area. We will only disturb about 300 square feet. Even that's a little conservative within this upland review area. The remainder of this building, the bottom, the ground surface drops off so quickly that the footing will actually be constructed on structural fill. We do not have to remove rock at the, I guess this would be the eastern end of this building. We only have to remove it in this vicinity here. So the rock removal, now that we have a detailed topographic survey, we've got a much better handle on the limits of the rock removal required to construct this building is quite small. And while we're here, given our main focus, this wetland, and Rick Hosley will explain in more detail how this rock can be removed. But again, we are slicing down vertically, and we're only going to disturb a couple hundred square feet within the upland review area. It's our opinion that there's no potential adverse impact on this wetland associated with the removal of this rock required to construct this building, Carriage House number 2. And again, Rick will talk a little more about that. And let me just say one more time that the major portion of this building does not require rock removal to construct. Its bottom of footing elevation in large part will be constructed on compacted structural fill. In other words, no excavation required. We actually have to raise the grade in order to construct the footing, if that makes sense to you all. So while we're here at this location, any questions about that or the construction of this building?
I have a quick question. I mean, 300 square feet is great. That's less than what you said. Obviously, it would be nothing to blast if you had reduced that building by 1 unit, right? I mean, you're kind of, and I don't know if that was an option or one of these alternate plans, but you're squeezing in, you're really squeezing these in, and you would avoid any wetland impacts if you just reduce that by 1 unit. I'm not sure if you guys.
I think what you mean, Kil, you said we would avoid any wetland impact. I think, like I said, we don't believe that there will be a potential adverse impact to wetland. I think what you might mean is we would avoid activity within the 100-foot upland review area, and that would be correct. Yes. Yeah, we
right.
do.
Okay, but well, you're right. Except I think, and I'm sure your blasting expert will address this, but. And I know you guys have done these test pits, but I know also that when you are blasting around ledge, sometimes things can shift and move and affect subsurface hydrology and drain wetlands. And I'm sure so that is a potential, perhaps. And we could talk about other things, but so you could very simply, you're right, you could avoid any wetland discussion about this part of the property if you had reduced this unit by 1, because then you wouldn't need to squeeze it in up against the rock face and blast out enough room to work.
So I'm going to leave that issue that you just brought up, of course, to Rick Hosley and David Ward. I can, as you know, I can just explain what we need to do to construct this. I do know I can also speak to the fact that surface water runoff from our construction is not directed toward that wetland. There are sediment control barriers shown at the property line, which is a standard of practice. And so even during the construction phase, there should be no potential for sediments, from surface water runoff to reach that wetland. The remainder of that, I'll leave to Rick Hosley and Dave Ward. But I did want to make it clear that now that we have this detailed survey and we've been out in the field and taken measurements and actually stood here, we've laid out the corners of these buildings to see exactly where they fall, and we've shot elevations to see where the first floor will be and therefore where the bottom of the footing will be. We know that this rock outcrop is not touched, and this rock outcrop, the amount of rock that has to be removed is much smaller than we had estimated.
Mike, this is Lee, and I apologize. I wasn't on the site visit, and I think I may have asked this question 2 months ago. Where does the water drain? How does the water drain in that southwest corner now?
Best I can tell, Lee, if you can see these ground surface contour lines, these dashed lines. So of course, as you know, Lee, surface water, runs perpendicular to them.
Yep.
So as you can tell, it would drain as I'm tracing with my cursor. I'll do it again in that direction. Kind of, I guess that would be southwesterly.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. Can't tell you what happens on the adjoining land because we don't have topography, but as you can see, we've called for a sediment control barrier at the property line during the construction phase and until any disturbed ground up here has been stabilized.
Thank you.
Yep. So if we move over to, well, let me talk about the last area of rock removal, and that would be up at the east end of the building. We do not think it has any potential to adversely affect wetlands, but I'll leave that to Rick Hosley and David Ward also. And this rock removal is to get the wastewater effluent force mains, junction chamber, and the gravity lines down to the leaching fields in the front. And Rick, we spent a lot of time up here taking measurements and looking at this, and Rick will speak to this in more detail later. And I think we've covered the work required here at the southeast corner of the property with regard to this off-site wetland. And then I think the last thing I wanted to talk about is stormwater management. I mentioned it briefly, but I'll talk about it in a little more detail. So before I do that, any other questions?
Well, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
This is Tom. On the southwest corner, we're talking about an area where there's going to be rock removal. There,
yes, here.
Yeah. There's looks like a large tree right on the borderline, which wait, is that tree going to remain, or because it might stabilize the ground? It's inside the blue 100-foot marker.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. We actually looked at the trees, and maybe Rick Hosley can help me. We counted them. I think we determined that 6, maybe 7 trees would have to be removed. And I believe this one can stay, as well as 1, 2, 3, 4. That would make 5. I think these 2, the 3 in the building, of course, seemed to me that there was 6 or 7. A couple of them were not in good shape. Also, as we stood there and looked at them, so it's a half a dozen or so trees that would have to come down.
Thank you.
Yep. So I think that might leave us with stormwater management. So and again, I'll try. This is the most I've talked in a very long time. I'm sure you're all sick of me, but I'll try to do this as fast as I can. So there's a There's a drainage divide created by this big rock outcrop that the estate house sits on. You have a northern catchment area and a southern catchment area. Pretty obvious when you're out there in the field. Soils are sand and gravel in the front. Soils are sandy in the rear, but we have surface rock, we have bedrock, and again, we did not encounter groundwater. Very different soils between the northern part of the site and the southern part of the site. The northern catchment area is a lot easier to discuss storm drainage wise. The runoff from the roof, at least half of the estate house today, through its gutter and rainwater leader system, just discharges right down the rock outcrop to the lawn. And because the lawn is so flatly sloped, and because the soils are so permeable, and the topsoil is relatively permeable also, the roof water simply infiltrates into the ground in the existing condition. In the proposed condition, after this would be redeveloped, we propose to have the roof water just like the estate house building, typical, just like everybody's house, gutters, rainwater leaders. The roof water just goes to the ground and infiltrates into the flat sloped lawn area and into the natural soils on the site. The driveway, because we're widening it, there's a detail on the plan that shows that it's cross sloped towards the lawn area. So the intent is to have surface water run off the driveway onto the lawn area. And again, because it's so flat and the soils are permeable, have it infiltrate. In addition, as I said earlier, I talked about the estate building already. I'm sorry. So the estate building's roof water goes here also. So that's the extent of the stormwater management system for this northern catchment area. We're able to handle stormwater without any structural solutions, without any modeling or any computations, because this is such a big, relatively flat, permeable, natural soiled area. And stormwater runoff generally heads in a in a northeast direction towards this corner of the property. But in the frequent small depth rainfall events, which are the ones that we are concerned about regarding water quality, stormwater runoff should infiltrate into this lawn area. And again, the new impervious surface in this catchment area is the widened driveway and this new house. Is that any questions on that, on the northern catchment area? In the south, we have very different soils again. We have surface rock and bedrock outcrops. And we are, although we are removing impervious surface by removing this building and removing some 2,600 square feet of pavement, we are constructing 2 new buildings, our new parking court and these 2 garages. So overall, we actually have less pavement in the proposed condition than in the existing condition. But total impervious surface area, we have more total impervious surface area because of the roofs. The roof water on residential buildings, if it's standard roofing type construction, is considered relatively clean with a low potential to discharge pollutants. If it was a commercial building and it was a metal roof, or if there was some equipment on the roof that generated pollutants, or if there was some process inside the building that vented to the roof, it'd be a different story. But these roofs are nothing more than all of our single-family home roofs. So despite that fact, we have collected the roof water anyway. So our proposal is to collect the roof water from the 2 garages and these 2 new buildings, collect the surface water runoff from our parking court, and direct it to a subsurface infiltration system, which is comprised of precast concrete galleries below the ground. Given the site conditions, the presence of rock, all of the water mains and the water services and the other utilities that have to go underground, we've gotten the most storage volume beneath the ground that we can. And we have met, by doing that, we have met the water quality requirements of the Connecticut DEP Stormwater Quality Manual. We've met the groundwater recharge volume requirements of the same manual. We've met the runoff capture volume requirements of the same manual. Those with regard to water quality, annual groundwater recharge, and runoff capture, which I'll explain in a minute. We have met all those requirements through the site grading and the additional subsurface infiltration system. The runoff capture volume is defined as the volume of runoff generated from the first inch of rainfall. And the standard of practice for this particular site would be to capture that volume and retain it on site if possible. And the reason we're doing that is ultimately surface water runoff from this site enters the tidal wetland complex associated with Fence Creek to the east of East Wharf Road, some 300 to 400 feet away. So the standard of practice is when you have a stormwater discharge to a tidal wetland and within 500 feet of a tidal wetland, that you capture the runoff capture volume and retain it on site, and we have done that. So those 3 standard of practice hydrologic criteria in Connecticut DEP Stormwater Quality Manual, which are the standards that practicing engineers follow, have been met. Site grading and the provision of the stormwater infiltration system. With regard to the rates of discharge, the peak rates of discharge of stormwater runoff. Well, let me back up. In addition to those hydrologic sizing criteria or hydrologic criteria that I mentioned, our subsurface system is large enough to store the runoff volume from the 5-year rainfall event. And so we exceed all of the 3 standard of practice hydrologic criteria that we have to meet: water quality, groundwater recharge volume, and runoff capture volume. With regard to peak rates of discharge of stormwater runoff, our analysis shows a small increase for the range of storm events from the 2-year rainfall to the 100-year rainfall event, ranging from 0.4 cubic feet per second to 0.9 cubic feet per second. So although we have an increase in the peak rates of discharge of stormwater runoff in the developed condition, we believe that those increases are relatively small, and that should not have an effect on the downstream wetland on the adjoining property, and certainly not on the culvert that passes beneath East Wharf Road. So that's our stormwater management system in a nutshell. I think I need to, just for the record, I need to go over one more thing. The reviewing engineer had a lot of comments about the proposal. we answered, and I hope that the agency has this, 2 weeks ago, we submitted a response to each of the two different engineer review letters. I think Rick Hosley submitted a written response to Mr. Sissel's letter, and I submitted a written response to Mr. Trinkus, if I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I'm not, to his letter. Did the agency see those written responses? Do you have them?
Yes.
Yes.
So a lot of the comments, I think you would all agree, aren't applicable to this application. The letter was addressed to the chairs of, your agency, the Conservation Commission and Planning and Zoning Commission. So most of them, most of those I won't speak about, but there's a couple that I should. One is that, and I think this is important because the septic tanks and the pump chambers and the force mains for these buildings are in the rear, in this rear catchment area. The reviewing engineer made a comment that the local health department does not have jurisdiction. I'm going by memory here, and I hope I'm quoting this correctly. I think I am. That the reviewing or the local health department does not have jurisdiction over the septic systems, and that the State Department of Public Health does. That is not my understanding, and I confirmed my understanding by contacting the State Health Department. The regulatory jurisdiction of these septic systems for this particular project lies solely with the local health department. The regulatory, if you read my letter, you'll see that I said the regulatory divide between the local health department and state health department is not the sum of the design flows for all the buildings on a site. It is when one or more individual systems has a design flow of 2,000 gallons per day or greater. So although the sum of the design flows is greater than 2,000 gallons per day, there is no single system that even approaches 2,000 gallons per day. These are all 3-bedroom systems. So that would be 450 gallons per day. So I think that's an important point here. The local health department has jurisdiction over these septic systems. There's several comments about stormwater management and that our stormwater management system doesn't meet current standards of practice or the town of Madison's stormwater regulations contained in the zoning regulations. I don't think I'm going to speak to all those technical points now. I did try to answer them in the letter and in the subsequent information that we submitted 2 weeks ago. So I just want to make sure that you've all seen that letter.
We have.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I'll leave it at that. I'll try to answer. That was a long one. I apologize. I will try to answer any more questions that you may have, and if not, I think Rick Hosley will speak to you next.
Okay, I have a quick question, Mike. Sorry. And for your galleries, you're sure that you can put those all in? I know you've done test pits, but there's enough space for what you've sized?
Yes.
So when you go to excavate, so because there's bedrock and ledge and all the stuff there, and I'm sure you haven't dug test pits all over the place, but do you think that what would happen, I guess, if you couldn't, if you encountered, I don't know, I guess bedrock there and couldn't put all of those galleries in?
Right. So good question. So I think we've done enough test pits. What we haven't done is a good enough job documenting exactly where they are. We will do that, but I think we've done enough test pits where I feel comfortable in being able to construct the galleries where we show them. A good portion of them, just like Carriage House number 2, will be located in fill. That fill has to be chosen, has to be chosen carefully and placed carefully. These drawings, as you know, are permit drawings. They're not construction documents, but I can tell you that that fill material has to be chosen carefully and placed properly. So, and I guess the reason I'm saying that a good portion of these galleries are in fill is that actually elevates them. The bottom is above the existing grade, a good portion of them. We have to be, the bottom of those galleries should be, a minimum, in my opinion, a minimum of 4 feet above any bedrock. And I believe that we given the test bits we've done, we will exceed that vertical separation distance from the bottom of the galleries to bedrock. So what would happen if we, and you can, Kilo, what would happen if we ran into a spike in the ledge, a knob of rock that comes up? That was unexpected. It was somewhere in between our test pits. I think there is some flexibility in the area where we did testing in this existing grass island. In fact, if you go out there tomorrow, you can see the test pit actually has settled. You can actually see evidence of where we did the test pit. I think there's some flexibility where we could relocate galleries in this area.
I'm set on questions. If you want the next person to come talk, because oh my God, it's already 8:08.
It is. I apologize. As you know, I don't like to talk this much. I'm sorry.
I think you did a well good job on it.
Thanks. So I'll turn it over to I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it over to Rick Haza. If he's still with us. There it is.
I am Mike, and I apologize. My internet has been a little unstable tonight. But fortunately, I was able to catch your report. I am going to ask you to share your screen again and get back to some of those locations where the rock is so we can identify in more detail the exact areas and some suggestions that we had about alternative methods to blasting for the consideration of the applicant. Specifically, the applicant has asked us for alternatives to blasting. Again, my name is Rick Hosley. I'm president of Realty Securities Consulting and the Hosley Companies. We're a 3-generation small company of 98 years. I'm the technical director for the European Federation of Explosives Engineers and the past president and technical director for the International Society of Explosive Engineers. If you recall my last presentation to this group, I had a PowerPoint presentation that demonstrated the topography and the jointing, which is very significant on this property because the jointing, which is pre-existing cracks in the rock, really dictate not only how the rock is going to break, but in what directions. And we also demonstrated in that previous presentation, which I believe is on YouTube, the fact that there is evidence that explosives energy does not migrate outside the proper blast design, and it will not shift rock outside the blast design into the rock mass. And To maintain that practice and principle, we have submitted a report, which we have called the Focus on Execution and Impact of Blasting Affecting Wetlands and Adjacent Structures. A guideline, if you will, a checklist, if you will, for a contractor who would work on this site and similar sites. So I think that would be important to review, and I'm assuming that the board has received that. I'd like to start, Mike, by Michael, if you would, by zooming in on carriage house number 2 and defining in a little more detail what we talked about with the rock area there. If you notice, as we zoom into that area, you can identify the 100-foot inland wetland upland review area. And Mike, if you can zoom into that particular spot and bring it a little closer to us, I think we can determine from your map and a scale that that upland review area is approximately 4.5 feet off the proposed corner of the carriage house number 2. That travels through the green area, which is identified as a rock outcrop. Thank you. Exposed rock outcrop. What's significant about this area is the fact that there is approximately 10 feet of rock that needs to be removed north-south in this area to build carriage house number 2. But you actually have to go outside the foundation of carriage house number 2 to the south, an additional 4 feet for working room for the forms. So essentially, north to south, approximately 1/2 a foot outside of the 100-foot inland wetlands upland area would be the edge of cut to install the foundation for carriage house number 2. Total that up, and it's a total of 14 feet of rock from north to south that has to be removed. If I haven't lost you with my unstable internet connection, the area traveling east from this corner is approximately 30 feet. So to summarize, the area of rock that needs to be removed in this corner is 14 feet by 30 feet. And as Mike had mentioned earlier, a cut of 5 feet with another foot possibly for crushed stone underneath for to mitigate any water that might pocket in that area. If you go out to the site and identify this corner of the building and the back line, and then step back 4 feet to the east, to the south, you will realize that you are not yet on the top of the slope, and that the edge of this cut 4 feet outside the house foundation, carriage house foundation, is actually lower in elevation than the peak of this ridge that travels essentially east-west. Again, and when I described this property in my earlier presentation, in a PowerPoint presentation, this property is a sequence of anticlines and synclines, meaning peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. And the trees, there was a question about the trees. The trees tend to lean and grow toward the south because of the open area to the south, where I believe there's a tennis court located. So those trees are actually leaning toward the south, which is favorable in the sense that they're not leaning toward the proposed carriage house. On the other hand, those trees are growing very shallow to bedrock, and there's if you remember from our previous presentation, PowerPoint presentation, I mentioned that the joints in the would not migrate further. I lost you there for a second. If I'm back, value.
In the interest of trying to continue to make progress, I'm going to suggest that we have David Lord speak, who I believe would be our last speaker that we intend to present tonight. And if Rick can straighten out his internet, we'll talk to him. David, are you prepared to with your remarks at this point?
Yes, I am. Good evening. For the record, I'm David Lord. I'm a certified soil scientist and environmental consultant. Company is Soil Resource Consultants of Meriden, Connecticut. Believe in the application package documents, you have a report from myself to Mr. Ott, dated April 15th of this year. Concerns the findings of an on-site investigation, which I conducted on March 26th of this year for the purposes of determining the presence of any on-site inland wetlands areas on the site. Looked at existing deep test hole information, soil logs, did a series of holes along the southeastern corner of the site, which was closest to the known offsite wetland. Found no indications of any high groundwater table. Soils there were excessively drained to well drained, fine sandy loams to sandy loam soils. And I went down to depths in excess of 3 feet with my soil auger, which is about the extent of what my hand equipment can do. On page 2 of my document, I have a description of the soil types that were originally mapped and confirmed during my investigation, the extent of which is found on an approximate field sketch map of soil boundaries. That's the final page of my report. For the sake of brevity, I will stop there as far as the soil investigation. There's a couple points I would like to make, though. You've heard already from Mike Ott about the proximity of the wetland in the southeast corner, or off-site to the southeast of the subject property. That area, looking at it from the property line on the south side of the existing garage structure, is about 50 to 60 feet off-site. We didn't obviously do any field measurements, but it is a considerable distance off-site. And I concur with Mike that all of the proposed structures, the residential structures, are in excess of 100 to as much as 130 feet away from the closest wetland to the property in that southeastern corner. In the southwestern corner, just add to Mr. Hasley's description, the grading, the existing grades as he has stated there is a high point just outside or to the south of the proposed rock cut. That the grade extends for a short distance to the south and then falls off in that direction. But if you look at one of the, and I'm not sure the sheet, but the some of the localized topography is shown on one of the site plan drawings. The grading that falls off of our property in the corner there where the proposed rock cut goes actually is in a southeasterly direction, away from and moving further to the east of the offsite wetland, which is shown being 100 feet to the south of the southeast corner of the site. So all grading, existing grading outside of the proposed work is either internal to the site, meaning that it flows to the north and into the catchment system that's been designed for a capture of site-generated stormwater runoff, or does not flow directly in the direction of that delineated wetland to the southwest of the subject project site. The last point we'll make, obviously I did not have the ability to physically examine the delineated wetland to the southeast of the subject property. It's fairly described in a report that I'm sure you're going to hear some detail about this evening. It is, and I will just add, it is a linear wetland system. It is one which does not have broad, flat surface areas. It appears to collect localized surface water runoff that drains to it and conveys it in an easterly direction from the adjacent property to the immediate southeast and further east to, I believe it was Fence Creek, ultimately the tidal marsh area. This wetland also receives collected stormwater runoff from a storm drainage pipe, which discharges into, and I believe runs through a portion of this wetland from the tennis court, the existing tennis court area, and the impervious surfaces associated with that, which are located to the west of the upper tip of that wetland. That is the hydrology that feeds the wetland from offsite sources. The drainage features that have already been described, the underground infiltration and percolation in through the soils, which are suitable for that intended use, will help to provide base flow movement of water that infiltrates into the groundwater, into the ground on our site to the water table, which has the ability to reach this wetland and not create any starving of the wetland to the southeast corner from any of the proposed developments on the subject property. That wetland will continue to receive base flow both from offsite areas to the southeast and from our site post-development. I believe that's all I want to present at this time. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that the members may have at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Lord, I would like to ask one question.
Sure.
Is this activity going to contribute to the decline of any of the wetlands that are surrounding property?
Through my investigations, both on-site and visually off-site, research into the soil conditions there, the proposed grading, and as I mentioned, base flow infiltration practices, no, I do not believe that there will be any significant, probably even measurable impact to either of the wetland systems which are off-site to the south from the proposed development. I believe that they will continue to function as they do today and see no long-term potential for adverse impacts.
Thank you.
Yep, I have a question. The proposed garden, which is within 100 feet of the wetland that we just discussed,
Yes.
what is if they used, if there are going to be any restrictions in the garden, such as Bower Park has, their gardens have, vegetable gardens have restrictions on what you can use. No, and I can't use chemical fertilizers, certain pesticides, things like that. If there any.
At this point, I have no understanding of that, but I think that is a reasonable request. It's done on many of the projects I'm a part of, limiting the potential for those types of products to move into an adjacent wetland, even this one, which is some 50 to 60 feet away in a relatively flat graded condition. I think that's totally appropriate to have limitations placed on a garden area such as this.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think it would be great. And Dave Anderson, you can pipe in. And I don't know, am I the only person on video? Should I turn my video off? Or just
I'm on.
see anybody?
You might
I'm
have
still
it on
here
Maybe
speaker-
somewhere.
you might have it on speaker view.
That's fine. I think if we're gonna get done tonight, we should have probably the intervener speak. And I know that Mr. Hosley had problems with the internet. And I think if people have questions about, or if there are more questions at some point about that portion, we can come back to it. But I think unless there's some burning question for him, it would be great to move on.
I agree.
So I'll take, okay. All right, so Dave Anderson, do we have someone speaking?
At the beginning, I suggested that we allow Attorney Ainsworth to decide whether he'd like to go
Right.
next or allow the members of the public. So Keith, if you have a preference.
Madam Chair and members of the commission, I'm Keith Ainsworth. I represent some of the neighbors. And I think since the public was here last time and perhaps even earlier than that, I'd like to give them an opportunity to speak. This is a public hearing. We're absorbing a lot of new material in real time. So I think at the very least, I think we ought to let the public speak, because some of them may wish to say their piece and go about their business rather than waiting through the remainder of the hearing. Some may wish to stay, but I think that would be maybe a fair way to proceed.
Okay, I think that's great. And Dave, I know you'll be managing that. I would just remind again everyone who's speaking tonight that really our agency is concerned with the wetlands, and I know there have been comments about the northern part of this property, but that has no wetlands. So if we can just restrict our comments to the wetland issues, that would be great.
Right, so there are about 14 attendees on, so if any attendees would like to speak, please raise your hand, your virtual hand, and I can unmute you one by one and allow you to talk. I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment. Oh, I do have one now. Dave Gagnon, if you could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, my name's Dave Gagnon. I'm the owner of 22 East Road in Madison. I'm the property owner at the southeast corner with the wetlands being discussed. And I do have a concern, obviously, of the excessive runoff that might occur. One of the questions I have is, we have high water tables as it is. I mean, what does that do to the water tables in that area, which I would imagine would increase surface water? The water doesn't drain all that freely, due to the fact that it's not elevated all that much. But, with an increase in the area of surface water standing longer, obviously it's a breeding ground for mosquitoes and, deadly viruses. But in addition to that, I would imagine the pollutants that would come off of that property with all the activity with the pesticides, the multiple autos that would be on the property, eventually over time would be an accumulation of pollutants that would just sit dormant in that area of the property. I don't know if that's ever been addressed. And I'm just curious on the tank that's going to catch the overflow down where the house is going to be torn down. Has there been any testing to see if the leaching soil is of the right quality for that type of system and what the intent is there? But I do have some big concerns about the runoff into the property. And if it's more than what's been anticipated, my neighbor's garage is literally 2 feet away from that area where the water flows through. And I would imagine that would encroach on his structures at some point. But I'm very concerned about the runoff and the quality of the water that might evolve from that project. I don't know if anybody has any comments about that or,
So, Chris, would you like to respond or have Mike respond to any of those points?
Yeah, Mike or David Lord, I think to the extent they didn't cover that well enough, I think can reiterate how those issues are being addressed. Mike, are you there?
Yes. I'm not sure I'm going to remember all of that. So Mr. Gagnon, you might have to repeat some of it, but
I can tell you because I took notes and Mr. Gagnon will correct me, but he's concerned about standing water. He's concerned about the wetland area as it channels potentially going near the garage of his neighbor. He's concerned about the soils that are in and around the detention facility or basin that we're proposing. Did I say pollutants? Maybe not. The pollutants that might be in the water from use of pesticides or oil or other products from automobiles that might be on this site. Does that seem accurate to everybody?
Yep.
So that's a lot to talk about, but first of all, just to be clear, the stormwater infiltration system is not located down near the current garage and apartment building. We've relocated it. It's much further upslope in the area of the existing turnaround, paved turnaround in front of the State House. As I talked about earlier, with regard to water quality and the type of pollutants and their loadings, that concentrations that are expected from this type of residential development, it's my opinion that we meet the standards of practice by meeting the requirements of the Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual. So that's what we can say about those pollutants. I cannot speak to pesticides. I don't know if pesticides will be allowed to be used in this development. I cannot speak to them. That is a different subject matter in itself. With regard to the neighbor's garage and stormwater flow adjacent to the garage, I do not think that there is a measurable difference that would cause, could possibly cause a problem. I do not think that water is going to pond anywhere. The state topographic mapping that we've looked at, actually a portion of it is included in Mr. Logan's report, does not show that that wetland, I don't believe that that wetland is a depression. I believe it has a gradient, a ground surface slope to it, and stormwater runoff should leave that area as it likely does today. I don't know if that answered all of the questions, but I'd be glad to try to continue if I did.
David Lord, do you have a response to that question about the functioning of the wetland post-development?
It's not clear.
You might step away.
Yes, Jude, come back.
Chris, were you talking to me? This is Dave Gagnon.
No, Dave, sorry.
Okay.
I was talking
No,
to David Lord.
I
to
had
see if
mine
he-
muted, so you didn't hear what I
Okay.
had to say. I hope you thought it was good. The capabilities, there was a question concerning the capabilities of the infiltration system.
Muted himself again.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but the infiltration system has been moved farther away from the southeast corner of the project site. That allows for a lot more treatment, cleansing of anything in the stormwater column as it passes through the soil. That in addition to the residence time within the infiltration system and the capture of that stormwater quality volume is generally the standard of practice for issues concerning areas which may be treated with pesticides, herbicides. A lot of those constituents are attacked by chemical and biological processes in the soil as that water passes through. They're either chemically bonded to the soil particles or they're actually taken out of the stormwater column. So I don't think there's any, I don't see any issue with the capability of the infiltration system as designed in the separation distance of it to the closest wetland feature. And again, I would second what Mike was saying, the wetland from the one photo that is in the interveners soil scientist package shows a linear wetland system with some gradient flowing to the east. It does not show an area where water would further stagnate. Again, as far as those photographs are able to show us, I don't see any potential for excess ponding in the area off-site of our site. I think the water that flows now and the conditions are going to be mirrored post-completion. What issues are present are likely going to be present. We're not going to remove those, but I do not think we will significantly adversely increase those water issues. That's all I have to say at this point on that subject.
Just one last question. Is the storm runoff the collection of the water that's coming from the dwellings, the rooftops that are channeled through the drainage from the roofs, but also the runoff from the sidewalks and the driveways? Is there going to be a runoff from the surface area as well into that tank?
Yes, so we through the, as I was saying earlier, through the site layout, as well as the site grading, The intent is to capture the runoff from the new parking court. So the driveway circle and all the parking spaces. There's a small portion of sidewalk that drains into this catchment area. The remainder of it goes out front. So yes, that all that pavement, small portion of sidewalk, as well as the new building roof areas will be directed to the subsurface stormwater infiltration system.
All right, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, next hand up is Laura Downs. And Laura, again, just state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Laura Downs, 54 Quarry Ledge. I just wanted to state that we are concerned. The water that appears in our wetlands, we are the southern neighbor. We have the wetlands that's on the map. The water that appears, it creates a vernal pool in the spring, and it's visible now. And the best that we can tell, it comes from underground. And we're very concerned about the rock removal at the top of the ledge and how that will change both during construction and after the build. So I just wanted to state that we are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody else wishes to speak, please raise your hand. All right, Robin Phillips. Go ahead, Robin.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Robin Phillips. I live at 880 Boston Post Road. I'd just like to comment on a couple of things really related to the uncertainty of the stormwater runoff and the blasting, or the proposed blasting. I think, as you know, we are very protective of the creek, and the General's residence development has certainly impacted that. And so we have another development here. And what I wrote down is a quote that the runoff should not have an effect on neighboring property or the creek. So that's a should not. It's not a definitely will not. My concerns, particularly for the creek, and excuse me, David, but particularly for the creek, really haven't been resolved here this evening. And the second point, with all respect to you, Mr. Hosley, we also heard earlier this evening that with the blasting, we don't believe the watercourse will be impacted. That's a direct quote. But the fact is, we don't know. The fact is, in any blasting, there is uncertainty. And when water's present, there's uncertainty of water flows. And just following on from Laura's comment here, belief is not good enough. There is a way, there has to be a way without blasting, without changing the water course potentially, that will have adverse impacts. Thank you.
If anyone else wishes to talk, okay. Peggy Zambrano. Go ahead, Peggy. You may need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It's Peggy Zambrano. I'm at 870 Boston Post Road, right next to the proposed development. And I have two observations. The one is that initially buildings 4 and 5, the duplex 4 and 5, are to be raised 12 feet above my property with fill. This does really alter stormwater runoff, considering that, and my second observation is this, considering that when you take down the garages, the 3-bay garage, you will see that there is exposed ledge and subsurface ledge. So 12 feet above my property, how is that water going to permeate over ledge. It won't. It will simply flow over the ledge and into the wetlands. So that needs to be considered.
Right, thank you. If anyone else wishes to speak, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any others, Kayla, so I think probably time to transition to the intervener.
Okay.
Yeah, may I raise one point just in as a point of order? I know for a fact that some of the public that just spoke are in fact clients of Mr. Ainsworth. Mr. and Mrs. Downs are in fact the interveners in the complaint. So I think it's important to know who is speaking from the public and who is represented by Mr. Ainsworth, because it seems like it's a double hit. If there are people from the public who are here and who are not represented by Mr. Ainsworth, I think we're looking at them as a separate group, and they may not be. So as I sit here right now, I don't know who Mr. Ainsworth represents other than because they filed an intervener petition.
Is there a particular reason that you care? Because I think we're going to hear whoever wants to speak at a public hearing.
Correct. I didn't want there to. If we don't know who he represents, I don't know how many people from the public are really from the public, or are they here together with Mr. Ainsworth? I think it's important to know.
Oh,
I guess Keola's question is, why is it important to know?
Well, I think it's important to know who you represent, and I think that the agency ought to be advised as to who is being represented by Mr. Ainsworth.
But I don't know if that necessarily impacts what their comments are. So I think
That's true.
You know,
That's true.
So I think this is our comment period. So
okay.
We open it up for whoever wants to speak. So regardless of if they're being represented by someone or not, I think they can speak as part of a public hearing.
Okay.
So I guess, Keith, are we on to you?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Ainsworth, as I noted earlier before, and I've been waiting here patiently and quietly as I'm supposed to. And my clients, I think, made, and yes, some of those were my clients. I'm not sure what the point was in making that inquiry as if it was some sort of suspicious conspiracy. Honestly, it doesn't matter who I represent. However, you do know who I represent because they did file an intervention application and their names are on it and they signed it under oath. So everybody knows there's no hidden information, there's no non-disclosure, there's no subterfuge. And this sort of mythology that there's some sort of evil conspiracy here and some sort of contentiousness is a little bizarre.
yeah.
Please move on.
I'm getting there. I've just listened to an hour and 49 minutes of the applicant, and I'm just beginning to make my statement. I think I'm entitled to make a statement. And I was just, my clients were just somewhat maligned, and I would like to respond to that. And the notion that this is a contentious hearing is just completely false. Everything that's been done on behalf of my clients and by myself before this commission has been completely professional and will continue to be. And so I'd like to continue by saying, I think there's some issues here that we need to consider. One of the things is actually one of my clients actually hit on a legal precept called the substantial evidence test. That was Mr. Phillips. He actually said, you know, we have a lot of uncertainty and the statements being made were should have and maybe and I think. And I heard the same thing from Mr. Lord, who actually used the term that you know, there shouldn't be and things like that. Well, the substantial evidence test, which governs the decision-making of this body, requires that the commission have substantial evidence, and expert testimony needs to be sufficiently definitive in order to be followed. Someone who speculates as to what might be the case from a distance at the boundary, at the property boundary, when your soil science and wetlands determinations are done by soil sampling, not by visual determinations at a distance of 50 to 60 feet. There was some discussion earlier about that it's really important that we note that this hearing was being held not because of a determination of substantial impacts to wetlands. Or actually, I believe your regulation actually states it a little bit more clearly than that, and says that if you determine that there should be a public hearing as a result of that there may be impacts to wetlands, that section 10.3 applies. But more than that, I don't think that this commission could have made any determination regarding the likelihood or lack thereof of impacts to wetlands at the last meeting or at the February 8th meeting when that declaration that there would be a public hearing was made, because the wetlands to the southeast weren't even noted at that point. The applicant certainly didn't have them noted on their map. They still don't have the upland review area noted on its site plans. And as I think I maybe mentioned at one of the previous meetings, that there had been some intrusion onto Mr. Gagnon's property where there was some soil sampling being taken. But I gather that information wasn't being used. So in section 9.2, your regulations state that the agency shall not hold a public hearing on an application unless the agency determines that the proposed activity may have a significant impact on wetlands or watercourses, or there's a petition, or the agency finds that the hearing will be of a matter of public interest. But then your regulations go on to say that there's considerations for an application, that you consider the application and the supporting materials, the public comments, the reports from other agencies, reports from the Natural Resources Conservation District or the RPA, and advice from staff. But then the criterion under 10.2, the criteria for your decision, the agency shall take into consideration all relevant facts and circumstances, including the environmental impact, the effect on the capacity to support wildlife and fish, flood prevention, impacts to supply, and the protection of surface and groundwater, control of sediment, to facilitate drainage and control pollution. And then this next standard that this commission is supposed to consider, which I think is material to what's being presented tonight, is that the commission is supposed to consider or must consider the applicant's purpose for and any feasible and prudent alternatives to the regulated activity, which alternatives would cause less or no environmental impacts to the wetlands resources. And this consideration should include the alternative of taking no action, postponing the action pending further study, alternatives to actions of a different nature, including using a different location for the proposed activity. Those are standards right out of your own regulations. So while the applicant insists that they don't have to present you with feasible and prudent alternatives, and they have not, they do, because there is a case which the wetlands, the appellate court ruled. It's called Starbell versus Inland Wetlands Commission, 183 Con App from 2018. The appellate court declared that where there were regulations that the commission shall enforce all provisions of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, which your regulations say just that, and they required all applications to contain alternatives, that the local regulations made the requirements of the state statute 22A 41A2 mandatory, not directory. And the appellate court said it's clear that the evidentiary burden imposed on the applicant. Now, remember, the applicant bears the burden and continues to bear the burden on proving that it is deserving of the application. That burden never shifts to the intervener. They still have to demonstrate that they meet the standards for the permit approval. But it's also, it demonstrates that the proposal is not only feasible and prudent, is the only feasible and prudent alternative, which ordinarily require an affirmative presentation to that effect. And there was this, the appellate court said that in order to prove that this is the appropriate way to go about this, they have to prove that there is at least another alternative that they considered. And if only one alternative is presented, the Inland Wetlands Agency can approve the application for a permit only if no feasible and prudent alternative exists. And the court went on to say, it's clear to us, therefore, that the applicant's burden to prove the absence of a feasible and prudent alternative is reflective of the legislature's intent to protect inland wetlands of this state. And your application section of your regulation 7.1 says an application shall include an application form, and such information is prescribed in section 7.5. 7.5 says all applications shall include the following information. Shall include, not may, shall. Subsection F, alternatives which would cause less or no environmental impact. That's mandatory. In addition, 22A41A2 says the commissioner shall, in this case, the commissioner or the commission shall take into consideration all relevant facts and circumstances, including but not limited to the environmental impacts and the applicant's purpose for and any feasible and prudent alternatives. And your section 1.5 says the agency shall enforce all provisions of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, which includes 22A41A2 that I just quoted to you. So that statement in the rebuttal to the intervention that they don't need to provide feasible and prudent alternatives is legally incorrect. They do, they have not, and therefore the application cannot be approved. It's at a minimum incomplete, and they haven't met the substantial evidence test. In addition, we have some information and some experts who are going to testify. I've got my soil scientist from REMA Ecological Services, which is George Logan, who mapped the wetland and delineated the wetland to the southeast, the one that the applicant did not inform the commission of it at the time of its application. And I also have with me Steve Trinkus, who did an initial report, but also has done a supplemental report. But both of those individuals have seen additional information this evening. But we'll see what they can do. I will turn it over to George Logan first for his comments.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is George Logan, REMA Ecological Services. I've been listening with great interest tonight, and as Mr. Ainsworth just mentioned, there's new information that we've been presented tonight. And of course, there's backup information to that information that we haven't seen yet. I'll give you one example, and that will be the soil test pits for the below ground infiltration galleries that have been presented to us tonight. So what I've done is I've listened. I think most of what I'm going to do tonight is ask some questions, point to some things that I think are missing still from the application, and kind of give you a few pointers as to some things that might be necessary for further analysis. Mr. Trinkhaus probably will give you a lot more information as far as how the engineering from a stormwater quality perspective blends, and I will probably take off from some of the comments that he will make. Maybe not tonight, maybe at a further meeting, in order for me to give you my opinion as to whether or not there will be a substantial adverse impact to down gradient and offsite wetlands. I'll start kind of a little bit in reverse in some comments that are light, if you will. I noticed is that everyone has been mentioning my report, which is dated March 22nd, 2021. The field investigation for that delineation that you saw the flags when we were out there in the rain. I was in February. And of course, I developed a report and I kind of give you some of the ideas and some of the information that is necessary to substantiate the wetland delineation, kind of give you a general understanding of how that wetland fits in with the general ecosystem in the area, including the off-site tidal wetlands themselves. I give you information in there as far as the soil types, both upland and wetland, and also generated a plan. If you remember, figure A kind of gives you an overview. I use an aerial photograph from the state GIS, some GIS topography, and of course some annotations that kind of give you a general idea. But it is a general idea, and that's one of the points that we were trying to make. We don't know exactly, and I might be completely incorrect as far as how I show the wetland boundary on that figure A that I just mentioned. What had been proper, I believe, is for those flags to be somehow surveyed, whether it's by laser, as your chairwoman indicated, so that we can see where the upland review area is, because obviously whatever happens in the upland review area is important, not only during the short term, but also during the long term. For instance, short term, you have a structure there that's going to be removed. And so there will be soil disturbance well within the upland review area of this offsite wetlands. And that's very important, I think, just on that itself to know what's going on there. That's not presently in the plans. And maybe that will be rectified in the future. In looking at Mr. Lord's report, my esteemed colleague, we've known each other good grief. We've been doing this for too long, Dave. He's been doing a lot longer than I have. I'll admit that. But in looking at his report, I think there was one little thing that I saw, actually a couple of things that I'd like to have clarification on. It's really I'm not trying to be adversarial at all. On his little plan that he has in the back that sort of serves as a sketch map, and he maps the actual soil types. I don't have any disagreement with the soil types at all. I think that he's correct about what he's saying, with a couple of minor exceptions potentially. I think, Dave, you forgot one map unit, and that's, you probably already noticed it, and that's that little loop in the southern portion of the property, which doesn't have a designation, doesn't have a mapping unit designation. I assume that's CD, Charlton Chatfield. I'll let you clarify that. I also noticed that the report shows that, again, to the extent that I understand that what was said by the commission, some of the commission members, is that what's happening in the northern portion of the property, which is there are no wetlands there, it's far away from wetlands, doesn't have much to do with anything, but the window has kind of been opened by Mr. Lord's report, which he mapped the soil types in the northern portion of the site also. And he did mention that he looked at some of the soil test pits. And I note that there was one particular soil test pit, that was test pit number 1, which is kind of maybe aberrant. It's not similar to the rest. We're a little further away. And that apparently had almost like a dendritic horizon at 62 inches. Very fine sandy loam and silt loam combination, at least from the test log, with models indicated at about 42 inches. So that's very different from the rest of it. And the question that I would have liked to see is, that unit that's represented by that particular test pits, how far out does it go in an easterly direction? And maybe there should have been another test pit closer to test pit 1, but I'll let that for comment later. There's been some discussion in the past regarding that little pipe that we've noticed in the field within the wetland that are delineated off-site. I think we discussed that, and we made some assumptions, and who knows who's right. It would be nice to know for certain what the origin of the water that's emanating from that particular pipe. When I was out there in February, it was, I wouldn't call it a significant amount of water, but that it was actually running probably 2 to 3 inches of water within the pipe, which is a good amount. Not at the end of the pipe, because some of that water was actually being discharged within the wetland itself, because I said there was a couple of breaks that I noted. I didn't include a photograph of that, but I do have one if one is interested. We might have looked at it when we were on the field. I don't remember. But anyhow, it's important, I think, to, we're making the assumption that it's coming from the tennis courts. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. By the way, the tennis courts are not impervious. They're permeable, or at least semi-permeable. That's my understanding from looking at it and from people that used to own it or should know. So again, the pipe's important to know where it's coming from, and if that's going to have an impact at all on the overall stormwater that's going to be reaching that offsite wetland. One of the questions marks that I had here, which might be important because I think it's something that the applicant is required to quantify based on your regulations. I believe it's kind of standard for most regulations before wetlands commissions that I've seen in the past 33, 34 years. And that is that if you're placing fill within a site, particularly if within upland review area, but any fill, it'd be nice to be able to quantify it. And apparently there's going to be some fill that's going to be placed for, we noticed that the stormwater units are going to be in select fill. The question was, okay, how much fill is being brought into the site? Because that's obviously important, at least during the short term, because that could potentially lead into erosion and sedimentation. So that's one question that I had. And again, I'm jumping around because that's kind of how I heard it, and I apologize. There's no particular sequence to this. I'm just looking at my notes. And I think Mr. Lord agreed with this, and that what's going to happen at the proposed garden, it would be important. What kind of amendments might be had there as far as topsoil in order to create a garden? What kind of maintenance program would be there? Would be that something that's just maintained over time to look in a specific way or function a specific way? I think that's important, since of course it's not only next to the wetland that are delineated, but even if you split that house in two, the house garage, and say that some of it is going north as far as runoff and some of it is going south, not too far down to the east from the northern portion of that area, there's another wetland, which I mapped, and you probably saw that. And so the two wetlands coalesce, and then of course they reach a ditch watercourse, and they head straight for the tidal creeks offsite. And again, the question that I had in my mind is, what's the quality of the soils that's below the structure that's going to be removed? Is there potential for contamination that's basically covered now, that's now going to be exposed and potentially impact the wetlands that are nearby on both sides? Something to know. Here's something that, and this is not a conclusion, it's just a comment for us to sort of put in our thinking as we proceed. The Stormwater Quality Manual of 2004 is indeed the one that we try to follow. It gives us some good guidelines, and it allows us to do certain things with our stormwater management that's, from a water quality perspective, is important. But the manual is generally slanted to percent impervious surface. And it does not differentiate to any extent on the loading that's happening on said impervious surface, what is being generated. And so the thing you have to think about here, even though the impervious surface might be less or about the same at the end of the day, it's within the watershed of the offsite wetlands, particularly the ones to the east that I mentioned. The amount of vehicle traffic on those impervious surfaces is very important. There are publications outside of the manual that would suggest that it's axle miles or travel of cars over impervious surfaces. It's a determinant of the amount of pollution that could be generated. So you can have impervious surfaces that has 2 or 3 cars traversing it, or you have one that has a lot more, which is the case here. And the other thing you need to consider also is that when you use, and I'm sure Mr. Trinkhouse is also going to harp on that from his perspective, but it's something also that I'm passionate about, water quality. And that is that we all know that it's when we are to clean our water and polish it to the extent and renovate it to the extent that it doesn't have off-site effects of water quality. What the manual, which we've been referred to, mentions is that it's above ground stormwater management systems, ones that have soils and vegetation and organics, that are the ones that are what we call primary treatment systems. And the ones that are below ground, while they can do an okay job, they don't have those components which renovate water or pollution in water. And to boot, the thing you need to think about is that the above ground ones that have the soils and have the microbiology that's taking place in those rhizomes in that zone where the vegetation is growing, which can uptake and sequester pollution, does a lot better job at taking out dissolved pollutants. And if you look at the information that's out there, and I'd be more than happy to share it, a significant portion of pollution that's generated on impervious surfaces, even for toxic metals, is in the dissolved phase. Of course, we all know that nutrients, for the most part, are in the dissolved phase, especially for the nitrogen species. So you might have nitrogen and some of these other dissolved pollutants that are just going to completely bypass this below ground system. They reach the groundwater and they just carried, and they're going to be expressed wherever there's a discharge. And that obviously this discharge that we're talking about, particularly during the early portion of the growing season, where's it going to be? It's going to be in the wetlands, whether it's the one that I delineated or the one that I mapped. And of course, if it's comes out into solution, if you will, within these watercourses, it's going to take a beeline down gradient to the more sensitive resources, which is of course the tidal wetlands. So it's just kind of some things to think about, that just because you're targeting the water quality volume, just because you have an oversized system, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be effective enough to be able to protect on gradient resources. A little thing came up, lighted up, and I don't know, maybe this is something that we need to investigate, maybe it's nothing, but I heard from the property owner to the south, Ms. Downs, that the wetland in her property has vernal pool characteristics. Now, I don't know if she means that from a hydrologic perspective, or if there are actual vernal pool obligate species like wood frogs that possibly are out there, and that would be important to know, obviously. A good thing to know, because it's a characteristic, it's part of the habitat for that particular wetland. And even though we're not generally near, we're still within the upland review area, and that's something to look at. It's another thing that the regulations typically don't look at carefully, and so you kind of have to think things through, is you already have development in here, so you already have impervious surfaces. These systems are already being taxed to some extent by the surrounding development, and now you're adding to that. So cumulative impacts are also something that come to mind here. And are you going to reach a threshold where now you're going to trip some kind of ecological cascade effect that's going to have a detrimental impact to the habitat of the downgrading wetlands? Just kind of something to be thinking about. I think because I haven't had the opportunity to look at the revised plans or maybe some of the background information, I think I'll keep it short tonight. And I'm sure if there are any questions, I'll hopefully be able to answer you or tell you that I'm going to be studying it for the next time. Thank you so much for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. I'd like to turn this over to Steve Trinkus, and so we can continue on with the presentation. Steve?
Yeah, good evening, members of the commission. My name is Steve Trinkus. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Southbury, Connecticut, and I've reviewed this application, and I also reviewed the revised documentation submitted by the applicant just around April 15th. My primary focus is going to talk about the stormwater management system in the back, as it does have relevancy to wetlands. Dave, could I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay. This is sheet 6 of the plans were revised to April 15th by the applicant. As Mike talked about, we have a large gallery system here in front of the back building. First thing is there's two what I appear to be test pits, but they're unlabeled. So there was no way to correlate some soil logs with what test pit was which in this area. Mike seemed to imply that they had done additional testing, but that is not shown on the plan. All testing should be on the plan, whether it was good, bad, or ugly. It should be on there with all the soil logs so it can be adequately evaluated. As the chair pointed out, I think maybe one of the other commissioners, this eastern end of the system is located in fill material. The elevation of this gallery system is called out 11.83, which I'm going to assume is simply missing 100, and the top of it is actually 111.83, which would put the bottom of about 107.83. Now, this where my cursor is the 108 contour, so this system is going to be fully in in fill material. And while I understand this is a permit drawing, it's also imperative that the type of fill, how it's going to be placed here, is defined on the plan, because it has a critical aspect as to whether this system will function as intended. Now, on the western end of the system, we're going to be up at contour, let's see, 114. No, if it's 112, because there's not a lot of labels on. Yeah, so I guess around 113. So now at this end of the system, the western end, you're going to be 6 foot below grade. There's no test pits at all on the what would be the northern side of the system, and there should be. This system is kind of proposed what I call kitty corner to the contours, in that it's not set level and parallel to the contours, which would be more or less in the direction facing building number 1 here. All of the water is supposed to come from the parking area and the roof drains to this lawn inlet and then go into the gallery system, except the driveway cross section, while it shows a cross slope, does not show any curbing. So how are you going to direct the water from a paved driveway to a detention structure without curbing to define it? The water is going to take the path of least resistance, which may be off to the lawn area on either side. It's definitely not going to be conveyed directly to the stormwater management system. Additionally, it's stated that there's overflow from the gallery system. Now, there are some circles on the top of these galleries. There's, I think, 3 or 4 of them. There's nothing on the detail. It talks about the overflow going to the existing structure, but that information's not provided. We don't have any idea how this is really going to work. And while the 3 volumes, the water quality volume, the groundwater recharge volume, and the groundwater recharge volume is actually part of the water quality volume. And I believe the runoff capture volume is also equal to the water quality volume. So while there's 3 different volumes cited by the applicant, it really, I think, comes down to it's the water quality volume for the first inch of runoff from the contributing drainage area. While the volume may be provided in the galleries, what we do not have is an analysis demonstrating that the water is actually going to infiltrate into the ground. In order to do that, you need to have a double ring infiltration test done at or below the bottom of the proposed gallery elevation, because that is the soil there which is going to accept the water. So on the eastern end, that would be just below the ground surface. And on the western end, you would be roughly 6 to 7 foot below grade to perform that test. A percolation test is not an acceptable measure for determining the infiltration rate, because it measures both horizontal and vertical movement of water, where a double ring infiltration test solely measures the vertical movement of water in the soil column. And that's what is used in modeling stormwater management systems. And as far as that goes. The other aspect is the little lawn inlet here is not providing any kind of pre-treatment. So all of the runoff from the driveway and or the roofs are being directed to here to the gallery system. This system, because there is no pre-treatment of the runoff to reduce non-point source pollutant loads, is considered a Class 5 injection well by EPA, because you are directing water directly into the ground with no treatment. A large gallery system for septic could be considered a Class 5 well also, except for the fact that your septic tank is providing pre-treatment of the effluent from a house before it goes into a gallery system. But in this case, there is no pre-treatment of runoff. And because of the soils being relatively sandy out here, not as sandy as in the northern end of the site, according to the applicant, treatment needs to be provided before the water gets in here, because once the water is in here, it's going to be transmitted following the topographic gradient, which is a little bit to the south-southeast, and then draining towards the existing garage area and ultimately off-site, potentially towards that wetlands off this area that George was speaking about earlier. It will follow the topographic gradient. The groundwater table generally follows the topographic gradient, and as the contours are generally going in the southeasterly direction, hence that's where the groundwater will go. And without pre-treatment, you are going to be having increased pollutant loads, as George pointed out. You've got metals and hydrocarbons. You're going to have sediment, because the applicant states in their stormwater management report that you cannot use chloride-based de-icing agents here. And you also have nutrients. You have nitrogen and phosphorus. I know the applicant stated that roof runoff is generally considered relatively clean. However, we do get 40% of our nutrient loads from atmospheric deposition, basically stuff floating around in the air that lands on impervious surfaces. When it rains, that is washed off, and with gutters and pipe systems, that is conveyed directly to this. But the primary concerns are metals and hydrocarbons. As George pointed out, they predominantly come as soluble pollutants, particularly hydrocarbons. If you imagine a little spill of gas or a little drip of oil from your car on a pavement, it's not a solid material, it's a liquid material. Metals are another problem, because they are a fine particle, and they can go into solution and they can stay in solution for quite a while, and they can move through the soil. Whether there is a impact to the wetlands really depends on the groundwater gradient and how the water is getting to the wetland, and whether the groundwater is providing recharge to that wetland system or not. Groundwater recharge wetlands, basically the groundwater table is providing flow from the bottom of the wetland up to the ground surface. Some wetlands will discharge the groundwater, where the water ponded in a wetland goes into the groundwater and then moves outside the wetland boundary. But as proposed, the stormwater management system is not going to address the non-point pollutant loads that this site will develop, and will be discharged to the groundwater without adequate treatment. And again, following the groundwater can ultimately reach a down gradient wetland area, because that's what the water does. I think my other comments are more on the planning and zoning side, so I will leave it at this point on the stormwater management system. Thank you.
Okay. And I'd just like to check that if the commission received George Logan's wetlands investigation report. I know I filed it, and I think it was listed with, it wasn't listed with the application documents. It was listed with some general form documents. And I just wanted to make sure that that got into the record for the commission, because the commission can then see for themselves where the wetlands are and look at the contours. You can see that if the stormwater or groundwater flow is generally following the contour or a perpendicular line to the contour lines, you'll be able to see that the water flow goes toward the wetlands that he defined. But I just wanted to check on that. But with that, that concludes our technical presentation to the commission. And we'd be, of course, happy to answer any questions that you have at this time. I know it is, you've been listening for a long time, but we're done for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Are there, do any of the agency members have questions?
Actually, I have,
About-
I have one, Keola, and it's for Mr. Logan.
Yes,
And
sir.
hopefully you can keep the answer short. And the applicant seems to be suggesting that by removing those buildings on the southeast corner of the property and building a garden there, that would be a benefit to that wetland on the southeast property rather than a detriment. Do you agree or disagree with that
I
statement?
could say that it could be. It depends on what the specific plans would be. It's what they do for the demolition, you know, what the soil quality is, what the amendments might be, and what their long-term plan is. So
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
And I don't know, Keola, I don't know whether this is appropriate time, because that was a question I had for Mike as well for the applicant. And I didn't go through the plans. How detailed have you gotten so far as the design of that garden, Mike, and what the maintenance plans are and that kind of thing?
Actually, Lee, the landscape architect, designed that. And I don't believe he's here with us tonight. So we'll have to get you that answer for the next meeting.
Okay, well, is it in the materials and I just didn't see it?
I don't know. It could be on the landscape architect's plans, but I don't know. Wait.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question, and this is, I guess, for Mike Ott, for the curbing. So this came up in the materials that we were sent, and I know Mr. Trinkus just mentioned that as well. Is there a way that stormwater is being directed into those proposed galleries?
Yes, I think, you know, you can use curbing, but you don't have to. You can also grade the shoulder area to direct it to the inlet. So that's a detail and more information that has to be added to the plan. You do not have to have curbing. There's other ways to do it, but I think what we ought to do is add some additional information and detail to the drawings to show how that would be done.
Okay, and I guess the other question that was raised was the infiltration and the issue of not having surface treatment before all of that water is gathered up and put into these subsurface galleries.
I can't really respond to that right now. I don't think what they said was not having surface treatment. Mr. Logan spoke about you know, surface treatment facilities and their ability to provide water quality benefits, and I agree with what he said. I think what Mr. Trinkus was speaking about was some type of pretreatment. It doesn't have to be a surface facility, but some type of pretreatment prior to stormwater entering the subsurface system. So we're going to have to take a look at that, and we'll speak about that again at the next meeting.
Okay, right, and I had said surface, and you're right, he did say pre-treatment. And I guess I will address, Lee, thank you for bringing it up, because I've been thinking about the garden area, and I will just say that I think, and I hope we can see the plans, because the nutrient issues, particularly in that area of town, and particularly going into Fence Creek, are non-trivial. And a garden, when you say community garden, that sounds like fertilizer and maybe herbicides or pesticides, and that maybe defeats the purpose and the benefits of taking out that building and taking away that impervious surface if you then replace that with excess nutrients, which I'm not saying is going to happen, but that is definitely it. And I think Lee brought that up as a good point. That is something that should be addressed. Are there any other questions from the agency members or anybody else who wants to say anything at this time of night?
Actually, I got one too for Mike. And again, I realize these are permit plans, but how much detail or how much thought have you put into the actual amounts of fill? And, have you done like a tentative final grading plan or anything like that we could see? Not necessarily saying that we need to see it, but I'm just wondering how you're designed, because I'm just curious how the addition of fill is going to change the drainage into the structures and off the property, and some of the concerns that the public has raised.
So we do have a grading plan. Not sure I agree with having to quantify the volume of fill material. That can easily be done. But I think for a wetland application, I don't think the quantity of fill makes a difference.
I agree with that, but the grading does.
Grading plan. Yeah, it's the grading plan, which we do have. It's the grading plan. It is whether we are showing proper erosion and sediment controls. That's what's key. So I believe we are, but we'll be taking another look at that also. Be glad to. I'm not saying we're refusing to quantify the volume of fill for this wetland application. Be glad to do it, but I actually don't think that that's material. I think again.
Well, I should have prefaced my question, because you may have a final grading plan in the plans that have been submitted, and I just haven't looked at it. Is that what you're saying? So there.
Yeah, it's there. And I wasn't suggesting that you were saying that we should compute the volume of fill.
Okay, well, I'll look at the plan now. I know I can look at the plans and get the information. That's all I need.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Anybody else?
Madam Chair, David Lord, I
Yes.
just have one point I'd like to make. Both Attorney Ainsworth and George Logan made references to the fact that we have not identified on site plan drawings the wetland in the southeast corner or the source of water coming from the direction of the tennis court. I just want the commission to understand, I know I do not have access rights to go onto someone else's property to identify wetland resources or other issues like the drainage around the tennis court. So it's not a error of omission. It's something that I don't normally do in identifying wetlands that are on an additional or on someone else's property from my client. So that's the reason, from my perspective, that those bits of information that are referred to aren't on the site plan drawing. We don't have the right to access the other properties.
Right,
Thank you.
I understand that, but at the last meeting, my understanding and what we asked both parties to do was to exchange information so that we could actually have that information. So I was disappointed not to see the upland review line and that we're talking about estimates of where it might be. And I don't quite understand why the information from Mr. Logan didn't get transferred over to you, or even, as I suggested, you can get a laser measurer and you could have measured to the wetland flag, and maybe that would still be an estimate, but we'd still have a better idea. So my understanding from the last meeting was that there was going to be an exchange of information between these two parties, and we wouldn't, that particular question wouldn't have come up because we still seem to be stuck a little bit on some of these details that I had hoped would have been ironed out. Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I could just note that Mr. Logan's report with the map and the photograph with the diagram of the wetlands superimposed with the boundary lines was submitted to the applicant on March 22nd.
Yes, but it actually doesn't have, it's not delineated out from that either, at least the one I have. You have to, it's fine, but someone, I wish, could have taken all this information and put it together instead of us having to piece this together from the bits and pieces that both sides are giving to us. However,
May
we
I
will sort
address
this
that?
out.
But can because I'd like to address
Sure.
that too, because I think it was at my suggestion at the original meeting that the information be shared with us from Mr. Logan. Because I thought at that time we all have the same interest in determining where this area is and locating it. And Mr. Logan's report was provided to us on March 22nd, and that is exactly what we've used to approximate a location. We've also made sure that our regulated activities in the area and the development, no matter what estimate you use, we're 130 or 140 feet away from what anybody could argue is the location of that wetland. The final point I would make, and because my client is here and present at the meeting, my client made several requests to gain access to locate these wetlands before we even filed the application. So I think it's a little bit odd that the agency is kind of hung up on this area of wetlands to the southeast, and the applicant has no ability to do anything about it. So without going onto somebody's property. And I think even from the original meetings, Mr. Ott knew the general location of this area that might be considered wetlands, even though it wasn't mapped and doesn't appear on any data. I personally went to the town hall looking for maps. I had people at the clerk's office looking for maps that might show it on some survey. It wasn't located. We have a very good idea where the area is. I believe Mr. Lord and Mr. Ott have overcompensated for the wetlands in terms of what's going on there and where our activities are going to take place. But I agree with you. I would like it delineated on a map as well. And the circumstances have been such that we just haven't been able to give you a precise location of that 100-foot upland review area.
Okay, so duly noted. And yes, there is a lot going on. I will say there is activity. I mean, you're saying that your activity is 130 feet away, but it's actually not, because you're taking down a building and taking stuff out. So that is regulated activity within our presumed 100-foot review line. Regardless, It sounds like from what I've also been hearing from the various people who've spoken from the applicant side and the intervener side is that there's some future meeting happening where we will have more information. So Dave Anderson, where are we at as far as closing the public hearing or continuing this and getting more information and having some more evenings together at some point?
I guess, so we have time to keep the public hearing open. And so if the applicant requests to keep the public hearing open, I think we're obligated to do so. So I'd actually ask Chris to chime in on that. And then depending on what Chris says, I think the agency has options from there.
Well, certainly if the agency has questions and needs additional information, and I think Mr. Lord and Mr. Ott, based on my discussions with them, might want the opportunity to respond to some of the questions raised by Mr. Logan and by Mr. Trinkus. David and Mike, am I correct in that regard?
Yes.
Yes.
David.
So that being the case, of course, the applicant will request or consent to a continuance and a leaving of the public hearing open. I did want to at least request, and I'll duck when I ask for this, but I guess all you can do is tell me no. We have the resumption of the public hearing on the Planning and Zoning Commission scheduled for May 20th. And I was wondering about the possibility of a special meeting 2 weeks from today to wrap up our public hearing on this wetlands matter.
Dave Anderson or
Well,
I don't
yeah, I guess I'll
know.
chime in and then John can too. So the next regularly scheduled meeting of this agency is June 7th, I believe, which is 5 weeks from now. There are a few applicants for the regular meeting agenda that have been sitting here close to 3 hours tonight. So in some way, I would like an opportunity to separate this application out from the rest of our agenda items because I think it's a little fairer to handle it independently. So if the agency would be open to it, I'm happy to. I mean, I'm hosting all these meetings, so it's an additional meeting for me too, but I'm happy to host a meeting on the 17th if the agency's open to having one. And then we can potentially, maybe at least take a crack at trying to get through this application in advance of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And John Delore, do you have any thoughts?
No, I think that's reasonable to separate this application from, we'll have others next month. And I think that's a good idea to focus on this one and see if we can move it on.
That's okay
Okay.
with me, Kale. Hold on.
All right, that's what I was going to ask. For the agency members, so Tom, David, Newton, Lee, I think we've lost anybody else.
It's okay with
Is he
me.
still here?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
say
Let's
yes.
see.
for
All
me.
right.
Go for it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just get that on the calendar for March 17th. So we will continue this public hearing
That would be May.
until March 17th.
May
May
17th.
17th.
It may actually go that long, but
I know. All right, May 17th, we will reconvene and have another discussion. Is there anything else we need to do to?
I got one more
Move on
question.
to-
I got one more question,
Yes.
Kayla. And it may be for
course.
Mr. Ainsworth or Mr. Trinkus. I noticed in Mr. Trinket's April 30th letter that he didn't refer to Mike's letter of April 15th, where Mike answered his concerns in his February report. He referred to the drawings, but he didn't refer to Mike's letter. So I just wanted to make sure that he had received it. And he might want to take a look at that before the next meeting.
Actually, Steve Trinkus, for the record, yes, I did review Mike's letter, actually, after I wrote the April 30th one, and it didn't change the opinions in the April 30th letter.
Okay,
So I did see his response.
all right, so when you say not addressed, that just means you read it and you don't necessarily agree with it, I guess.
The issue that I originally raised has not been adequately addressed by the changes in the plans or the reports.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, just one brief question, a matter of sort of housekeeping. In order for us, if we're going to close the hearing and perhaps get the commission to a point where it can deliberate, we'd like to be able to receive whatever final revisions to the plans, let's say by the 13th, so that one, the commission can get those materials, but also the intervener can get them, so that when we hear the presentation, we can do our final closing on the 17th and not be responding in real time. If we receive it the same day as the hearing, it just doesn't make a fundamentally fair opportunity to respond.
That seems like a reasonable date and request to me.
Yes, no, for all of us. I know
Yeah.
it's a quick turnaround time, but it would be good to have the materials. It'll just go smoother if we all have it ahead of time.
So that's the Thursday before the Monday 17th meeting. Yeah, that's agreeable, and that's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're
I
continuing.
would just
the
take a
public-
motion.
Yes,
I would
yes,
make a
yes.
motion on the continuance, sorry.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna check in with you. So does someone want to make a motion? Anybody?
Well, I guess I'll move to continue the public hearing till our special meeting on May 17th, I guess.
Yeah.
On application 21-03, 856 Boston Post Road.
I'll second that.
All right. Any discussion? There's no discussion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye,
Raise your hands.
aye.
Okay, excellent. Well, great. Well, we'll see the applicant and the intervener and anybody else on the May 17th.
You very
And yeah. All right, so let's move on to the rest of our agenda. And I do apologize to all our other applicants. Normally, we don't have such long public hearings, or we haven't in many years. So our second agenda item is application 20-2754 Bishop Lane. Do we have?
Oh, he's still
Okay,
here.
that right? I know.
You're a trooper.
Hi, good evening. George
Yeah.
Norton. Would
All
you like me to
right.
run through it again, or, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just a brief, if you could just, I know this is the stump removal.
Sure.
If you want to just like in a few sentences, kind of recap, and then we can work on this.
Sure, absolutely. So the property 54 Bishop Lane, there's two trees that were overturned in a windstorm probably 15 plus years ago. And my request is simply, I'd like to overturn them so that the stumps are facing up, and the roots and what's left of the root balls are back in the ground where they originally came from. So that's my basic request.
Right, and you were, please, I'm sorry, if you could remind me which the kind of machinery or with that you were planning on using.
Sure, just probably a backhoe, basic backhoe, just to all they need is a little push, and they'll go right back to where they came from.
Okay. All right, so for our commission members, are there any questions for the applicant on this? We received it last month, so we will act on it tonight.
I went down and looked at it today, and it appears that it could very easily with a backhoe be pushed over and made upright. It would not cause any problems as far as I know, or as I can see. The area around it it has been cut out. He's got a lot of skunk cabbage in there, but other than that, it's pretty clear. So he's not going to be destroying anything that's not already been taken down.
Okay. I guess so. Lee or Tom Paul, do you have any comments or issues with this
No, other than-
application?
John, do you agree with what Dave just said? John DeLore?
I do, yes. I've been out there a couple of times with George, and we've kind of gone over it. I agree with David.
Okay, thanks.
It's okay with me.
All right,
Okay,
I'll
with me
make a
too.
motion. I'll make a motion. We approve application 20.7. Be under the condition to be done at a dry season rather than during a mud season. That's about it.
I'll
I
second it.
Okay, Tom second
Any other discussion? So dry season, I guess,
Well,
so yes.
we're in a dry season now, actually. It's not moist in there now, but if we have a real long rain, a good sized backhoe could rip it up pretty easily. So, just
Okay, so I guess the condition would be to do it when it's been relatively dry and
right.
there's
Yeah.
not going to be an issue. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. All in favor of this motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. Yay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
And-
you. I'll be back next month with a gatehouse and a carriage house to put in there, and I'll see if I can get your approval for that.
No.
Better be careful.
No.
Well,
Yeah.
May 17th meeting.
Better not be.
No. Okay.
Thanks for your time. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Now we're moving on to 21-1256 Texas Road. I think I have that down right. And again, we saw this last month. We did a site walk on Saturday. And so we, if we can, should act on this tonight. And it looks like we have someone speaking for the applicant here.
Good evening, Chuck Mandel, agent for the applicant. Before I start, I'd like to thank the commission for holding a special meeting in the next couple of weeks. Sincerely appreciate that. I represent Dan Dolan. He's the owner of 56 Tuxas Road. If you remember from the site walk, the garage is actually blocking the front entrance of the house. He would like to remove the existing garage and place it right against the pool. There is a wetlands area that we marked out. We propose to move the fence to the wetland boundary. We are also going to be mitigating the stormwater via stone trenches. Dave, I did send you an email very, very late today. I had a rough Monday. It was a typical Monday. So I did try to get the plan revised. I did have a couple of extra notes on there. One was in regards to the fencing, and the other one was regarding removal of invasives. And we would use the, for best management practices, the Connecticut Invasive Plant Work Group has certain recommendations for removing invasives, and we would certainly follow that protocol. And I had also wanted to get some plantings on there, nothing, some herbaceous perennials or some ferns, something low. It was heavily vegetated there, so I believe once the fence is moved and the invasives are taken out, I do believe that we'll revegetate with native vegetation in that area. And that's essentially the application.
So vegetation that you're talking about, is that on the back side of the pool near the wetland or in the front or all around?
Well, I was proposing it actually along the wetland fringe that we were going to plant, just as an added buffer,
Okay.
but it would be right on the back side of the fence.
So Chuck, this is the plan I think you sent me via email late today. I have up on the screen.
Okay, yeah. So there was just note 12 and note 13, which I had added on there, which talks about the fencing and the removal of invasives. And I didn't get a chance to put the actual plantings on there. But that's something I would hope that I could do with John or with the commission if they wanted to make that a condition of approval. And we could certainly give them a plant list and some quantities and show those to John.
Yes, that would be great because you are right up the wetland, not even, you're right up on the wetland boundary there. So
Correct.
hopefully,
Yep. I'm sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
so hopefully your plant list can be, hopefully native species. There seemed to be a fair bit of moss back there, so I'm not sure how open it is. I guess it's going to depend. And you're not taking any of those trees down,
No,
as we
trees are
discussed
to
at the
remain.
sidewalk.
Yes.
And the fencing, it's kind of hard for me to see on this, but you're going to take the fencing out and move it, and then hopefully leave a little space underneath for things to move. Although I'm kind of bummed because they're going to move into the pool, but maybe they won't.
Right.
Maybe
So
they can just.
Dave, if you go to the lower right corner of the drawing, we do have a fence detail there. And I did discuss,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I did discuss with the applicant of raising it up as you suggested. But he has very small dogs and he was concerned that they were going to dig underneath and escape. So I tried to convince him to raise it. He was very concerned about the dogs escaping. As you can see, there's almost a 4-inch gap between the bars. So I guess smaller amphibians could get in there. But as you said, you don't really want them getting into the pool area anyway. And it was a pretty steep slope for them to climb up there.
Well, no. Frogs can do that. Salamanders can do that.
Right. Well, they could certainly get through they could certainly get through a 4-inch.
But
Yeah.
yeah, what you won't get through there is like turtles, or you'd only get baby turtles, I guess that would fit. I don't know. What do you guys, the other agency members, do you have thoughts on the fencing?
That's gonna be a metal fence?
Yes.
Or is it gonna be wooden?
This is a metal fence right here.
Okay. But it's not the mesh fence that's there today, so it's like an upgrade.
Correct. Yeah, that fence is going to be removed. Actually, most of that fence was actually in the wetlands itself.
Okay.
It'll all be taken out.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I can get my head around the fence. And the plantings, I would encourage native plantings, and it would be great to have a vegetated buffer around the fence. So we talked about that and the trees and the invasives. Is there anything else? I know, I think Dave, you were at the site walk.
I think.
And Tom Hall, I think you were.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I missed it.
Okay.
I'll defer to you guys.
Yeah, I'll make a motion. We approve 21-12 for the as presented, given that the fence that they're representing now, and I'm assuming that the plant list that they gave us is acceptable to John and Dave. I haven't seen it, but
I haven't seen it.
No.
Oh, okay.
We didn't
Whatever.
submit one yet. We will go over that with John.
Okay, I second the motion.
Okay.
All right. Any other discussion? All right. So all in favor of application 21-12 21-12 as discussed in the motion, say aye, raise your
Aye.
hand.
Aye.
Okay, great. All right, well, that'd be great. And you can check in with John DeLaura on the plant species, and we'll hope the amphibians stay away or migrate past the pool.
Thank you.
All right, so our next application is 21-10, 259 Mungertown Road. I
Good
have that
evening.
right?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, that's me again. So, yeah. So, agent for the applicant, Chuck Mandel. Sean O'Connell is the owner, actually, and this is at 259 Mungertown Road. It's at the corner of Mungertown, and I believe that's Old Schoolhouse Road. Let's see. Yeah, Old Schoolhouse Road, which is it's at the very end of Mungertown. It's almost a third house from the end of the dead end where Mungertown Road ends. It's a very long, narrow lot. We had the wetlands delineated by Bob Russo, who's out there. My client is proposing, he is proposing a workshop for his son, and I did give a statement of use, and since this is for acceptance only tonight, that's part of the record, so we can read that later on for the next meeting. He's proposing to, I know it's a dirty word, but he has the son is a race car enthusiast, and he has a couple of cars. He does modifications on the car. It's a very exact science, actually, putting in, I don't really understand it myself, but yeah, replacing the shocks, replacing fenders. There's really no body work, no painting that goes on there, and perhaps an oil change on occasion, changing tires, that type of activity. And that, like I said, that's in the statement of use. And I would like to stake it out, and so the Wetland Commission could go walk that at some point. It was a former Christmas tree farm, so all the trees are very mature at this point, and those will be taken out.
I was looking at the drawing. I assume there's going to be electrical power to that house. And it's not represented on the drawing.
No, there's actually a power pole right across the street, so that it could go overhead.
Okay, all right. I was wondering if it was going to be underground or something.
No, it
yeah.
would go
Okay.
overhead. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We try to push this accessory structure closer to the road, but due to zoning and other issues, that's the furthest away from the wetland boundary we can get.
How far is it? I can't quite read it.
Like 47.3 feet from the nearest point.
Okay, all right. My drawing is pretty small. I can't see that. Read it.
Okay, are there, so so you're just proposing the workshop?
Correct. There will be no septic. There won't be any use for living space. It's just strictly a workshop to work on the vehicles.
And on what I'm looking at, the blue line with the triangles, that's the upland review area?
No, that's the flag wetland.
Or that's the wetland?
Correct.
That's the flag wetland.
Correct.
Okay. And so you're saying that, and I guess it's the scale, that shed is 47 feet away from the wetland?
Correct. Correct. The lot shape, the lot is long and narrow, so at its wide, we couldn't get outside anywhere on this lot. We can't be outside the review zone. This lot really, this lot would be, like I said, the wetlands runs the entire length of the north and south of the wetlands. So those blue there's actually a pond directly behind the house, and the house is actually We will have to redo the septic system. I think there had been some soil testing done, so that septic system at some point will have to be replaced also. But that's not part of this
Okay,
application.
and there's, right, but so just looking, so you're saying because of zoning, there's nowhere else to put it?
Correct. There's a, exactly. So the building setback line, I believe, is 40 feet in that area, but we have to be behind, but an accessory structure in Madison has to be behind the primary structure, and John can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay. All right. Well, that would explain why you're putting it there.
Correct.
Okay, well, it actually can't be in a front yard. So the definition of front yard is the closest point to the house to the front property line. So, you know, the way if the house is canted a little bit, then it can't be in that front yard area. So in this case, it's beyond the 40 feet. And the building, you know, it's a large building. So, you know, when you push it back a little bit and you keep it as large as it is, you know, it gets pushed closer to the wetland.
Well,
Okay, and I guess it couldn't go closer to that barn.
Well, actually, the wetlands converge. So we put it in the like in the belly of the wetlands.
Okay.
We're as far away as we possibly could.
Okay.
Given the shape of the wetlands.
Right. Okay. And yes, this is for receipt only. So are there any questions from the agency members to any more clarification before we receive this? No?
I'll make a motion, I make a motion, we accept application 21-10 and schedule it for the next regular meeting, not the special meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right. Oh, well, so anybody second? Okay. All right. Great. We've had our discussion. Yes. Okay. All in favor of accepting? Aye. Yes. Great.
Aye.
All right. Great. So we'll see you in June.
I'll see you at the walk probably, if you want to set a walk.
I don't know. I don't think we need a site walk.
No. Okay.
I don't think you need a site walk either.
Yeah, I think we're good.
You know, you could drive by and see where it's going to go if it's staked out there. It's a narrow lot.
Yeah, to stake it might not help you due to the fact that it's so thick and dense with Christmas trees right now. Yeah, you'd be better off if you went to the pole, and I'll tell you the pole number that's there if you're driving down the street. So it's looks like SNET 2862 is the nearest pole. So that's right opposite where the barn would go.
And we have the owner's position.
Yes, I believe by signing the application, you automatically have permission.
Okay, all right.
Yes, you absolutely have permission to visit the site.
Okay.
Okay, great. So yes, so we can go visit and look, but otherwise we'll see you next month.
Yeah, what I might do is I might put some paint stripes or put some stakes at where it's going to go, and then it'll just be behind that.
That'd be great.
On the street line.
That'd be great.
That'd be great.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so our next application is a subdivision. So it's P&Z 21-08.
So that's just a
42 Pleasant
referral.
View.
That's
Yeah, is that right?
I was going to do a little clarification on this one. So this one was actually before you previously as a subdivision referral, which you, I guess, acted favorably upon, and it was approved at the Planning and Zoning Commission. It was dividing one lot into two lots, and they're revising the lot line, and it's moving a little bit closer to the wetland. And so you're seeing it again as a subdivision referral. Mike is the engineer. I don't see him on the meeting anymore. So what I'd suggest is let's throw this on at the end of next meeting. He'll be there anyway. And that way you guys can take action on it before the planning and zoning meeting. But I think you can act on it. We mistakenly put it as a receipt only, but you can take action on it at that meeting.
Okay, that confused me. I saw that it said receipt only. Okay, well, I think that's fine, and I'm sure Mike won't mind.
Yeah.
So the action will be a referral letter? Is that what the action would be?
The subdivision referral, correct? Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you guys, when you open it up, you may remember you've seen it before. So.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's why it wasn't clear. Okay. Well, that's great. Then we'll do that. All right. So I think we're down to section 13. Is that right?
Why not?
I make a motion, we approve all of John's activities.
I second
Oh,
it. I
that's-
second it.
I got 5 of them. It's only going to take about 45 minutes.
No, it's not.
No.
I have great faith in you, John.
Thanks. They're pretty straightforward. One is, the first one is 21-09. That's 1023 Boston Post Road. That's actually the one that Chuck presented a couple of months ago,
right.
or a month ago. And your infinite wisdom directed me to approve it as a section 13. That was the septic tank. He put a septic tank in a thing. So that was basically, I approved it in April after that meeting, as the agency directed me to do so.
Just a quick question, John. Does Trent get involved with this, one like that? Don't they need a permit from the health officer?
Yeah.
And so
It's a new septic system.
right, okay,
He did have approval. I think he mentioned that at the meeting.
okay, all right.
Good question.
Just a thought.
No, you're right. He did get approval from the health department. The other one is 21-13, 128 Chittenden Field. That's a sanitary repair. Repair. It's a subsurface sewage disposal repair plan. Harkin did the engineering on that, and the plan. I don't know if you have it, but the new system is quite a bit further away from the wetlands than the existing system was. It's pretty much as close to the property line as it can be by health code, and away from the wetland delineation. So he's got a silt fence. He's going to stockpile some area. He's got that E&S around the stockpiles. There's not a lot of slope. It's pretty flat. It's a pretty standard sanitary system repair. Actually better than it was before, with a few times. It's further away, less impact. I don't know if you have a plan to see that. Should be.
Keep rolling through them, John.
Oh,
To your question, keep going.
Okay.
It sounds good.
Okay. The next 3 are 2 above ground pools and 1 in the ground pool. This is 22 Pierce Lane, 2106. Rich Snarsky went out, flagged it. I went out there and measured it. They started with a 30-foot diameter pool. I convinced them to lower it to 27, get it further away from the wetland flag. They were going to put a 6-foot deck on it, talked them into putting a 4-foot deck on. So they're about 25.5 feet from the closest flag. There's photographs if you want to see them, but it's flat. It's a flat grass area. Easily the pool just comes in from the cul-de-sac, and there's no disturbance. There's no grading. It's pretty much just drop a pool.
Okay.
Okay.
Is
I
the
didn't see anything wrong with it. You know, I didn't see anything.
in-ground pool?
I'm sorry?
An in-ground pool?
No, this is above ground.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is above ground. 21-11, 227 Green Hill. This is an in-ground pool and a pool house, a prefabricated pool house. So I went out there. Rich went out and flagged the wetlands. There's in front between the flat grass lawn and the wetland flags is a 6-foot vinyl fence. So the grass area, the yard is actually contained. The wetlands is on the other side of the fence. It's a solid, almost like a stockade vinyl fence. So, in closest point of any of the work between the pool and the accessory building, the pool house is, I think it was 37 feet, 35, 37 feet, the closest point. But all the material will be taken off site. There's really no plantings, it's just grass. It's going to remain grass, with an in-ground pool, a coping, and then a pool house, prefabricated pool house.
And it's flat. It looks like I'm looking at Google Earth. So is it
I
pretty
actually,
flat then
there's
as
a
well?
photograph of that backyard.
Yeah, I'll pull that up, John.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that's the
Oh,
backyard. And you can see,
Okay.
if you see the stake, if you look, you see the Sage Lounge, and then you see a little stick. There's 2 trees, and before the tree is that's the closest point.
Okay.
Okay. Looking
You
good.
can almost see the flag in the trees here. That's where Rich put them. Okay, last one is 19 St. Francis Wood. This is a 27-foot round above grade pool that's going to sit on an existing tennis court. There's no excavation, there's no disturbance, just they're going to bring it in, fill it full of water, and I think there's a small deck that's going to go around it, but the deck will sit also on the tennis court.
How far?
That's existing.
Yeah, it's existing.
Oh, I see. Wow. Okay, but how close is that? There's a couple wetland right there.
Yeah,
Looks like.
it wasn't, let's see.
Here, John, this is the diagram.
Yeah, so there it is. Thank you, Dave. 65 feet to the first flag. And then on the other wetlands, 53.5 feet.
Okay. All right. And yeah, okay. So they're just setting it, you can totally see that tennis court. So they're just going to totally set it there and swim. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Great. Good job. And look how fast you did that.
Yeah, Dave had to kick me along a little bit.
That's all right.
I was taking a lead from everybody else before me.
No,
I was
you got to
pontificating.
set a good example.
I gave you an out, you didn't take it.
Right.
Okay, well, that's great. All right, so we had, with our email, we had our regular meeting minutes from April 5th, as well as sidewalk minutes from March 20th that we need to approve. I've read both. I didn't have any comments. Okay, Dave.
I have one correction. On page 4, application 21-12, my name is Newton, not Newtown. No, that happens frequently, so that's the way it's shown in the Newtown. So just haven't changed my name. If you would.
Okay.
That's it.
No, that's good. Are there any other comments on either of those minutes? No. Going once, twice. All right, I'll entertain a motion to dispose of these.
Well,
Not?
I'll make a motion, we close inland wetlands meeting.
No, we have to approve the minutes.
Oh,
I'll make a motion.
Not yet.
I'll
I
make
got
a
ahead of
motion.
myself.
I'll make a motion that we approve the meetings as presented with the exception of my name change.
Okay.
Just,
All right.
just as a quick note to Marlene, that, Bob came in a little bit late. He was in the meeting and left about 5 after 9.
Yeah.
In case she
Okay.
wants to note that.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion to approve both sets of meeting minutes with the correction of Dave's name, spelling. Is there a second?
I'll
Does someone
second.
second? All right, any more discussion? No? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Raise your hand,
Aye.
say aye. Okay, great. So the next, we're getting there. The next remarks, I don't have any remarks. Thank you guys for, we had a long meeting, and I know in the past we've had long meetings, but we haven't had those in a long time. So it was good job, everyone persevering without, I don't know, I didn't have any coffee, so that's good. All right, so John, Delora, do you have any comments?
I wouldn't dare.
No comments. Okay, now, Tom Paul, you can make your motion if you'd like.
Okay, we're gonna close the meeting now.
I second
You
it.
need
I
to-
second it.
Okay. All right, all in favor? Me.
Good night.
Good night,
All right,
everybody.
good job, guys. And we'll
Thank
see you
you.
on the 17th.